My brother would sleep in my room often. He's 5 years younger than me, so I didn't mind. He seemed scared to sleep alone for some reason. My parents chalked it up to nightmares and too many scary movies. Well, one night, he wanted to sleep in my room again. My parents saw this and told him he couldn't, and that if I let him, I would be in trouble too. Not wanting to catch hell from them, I told him I couldn't, and that I was sorry. He begged and pleaded with me, but I firmly declined. Eventually he sighed and gave up, going back to his room. I had shut and locked the door that night to ensure that he didn't try to get in again. Sometime in the night, I had heard the doorknob rattling. I didn't say anything, but then listened as I heard the lock click, signaling the door had been unlocked. Now mind you, my brother and I aren't that bad at picking basic room locks. We have done it before in the past, and so I wasn't surprised when this happened. The door opened, and I turned to look, and I saw someone in a crawling position, looking into my room. I sighed, thinking it was my brother, of course, and said, "Fine, get in here, but don't blame me when Mom kills us both." What I thought was my brother crawled into the room, and I expected to feel his weight as he climbed onto the bed. But it never came. A minute passed, and I looked over. The door was still wide open, and all I could see was the darkness in the hallway. I called out my brother's name, and heard nothing. So I went down the hall into his room, and lo and behold, there he was, fast asleep in his bed. Needless to say, I slept in his room that night. This happened to me 5 years ago when I was 17. I have told this story many times because of how insanely scary it was, and I honestly still cannot believe that it happened. I worked at the local Walmart. It was only about a mile from my house. I always walked to work because I didn't have a car, and my parents didn't have a problem with it. On top of that, I never complained and assured them that I was fine with walking. My shifts would vary, but the one I got stuck with most often was a 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. shift. So when I walked to work, it was still daytime, and when I got off work, the walk home was very dark. On the day this happened, nothing out of the ordinary happened at work, and when my shift ended, I started walking. As I walked across the parking lot to the street, I noticed a man sitting at the bus stop. He didn't look suspicious or anything. I just noticed him sitting there. I crossed the street in front of Walmart and was walking down a long street that would eventually lead to my house. The street lights were very dim, almost not working at all. A few minutes passed, and I turned and glanced behind me. The man from the bus stop was now walking behind me. He was about 100 yards away, and he appeared to be on his cell phone. I didn't panic or anything, but I did think it was pretty weird that this guy was sitting at a bus stop and was now walking down the same street that I was. I quickened my pace slightly and brushed it off. Only about a half a mile to go. A few minutes later, I was thinking about something else, and then remembered the guy, so I turned around again. To my absolute horror, the guy was right behind me, about 2 or 3 yards away. What's worse, the guy was walking backwards. He was moving silently, and I was so taken back that I stopped, and as soon as I did, he stopped too. I couldn't see his face, as he was facing the opposite direction. I almost started laughing, thinking it was some kind of joke or something, but something inside me quickly told me that it wasn't. I suddenly became very aware that there was nobody else around. I almost spoke, but the words didn't come out. So instead, I turned and started booking it down the street. Again, to my horror, I heard footsteps smacking the concrete sidewalk behind me. I turned to look, and sure enough, the guy was keeping pace, running at full speed behind me, about 20 yards away now, no longer facing the other way. I didn't look long enough to see his face. Within only a couple of minutes, I reached my house and ran through the front door, which, holy hell, thank God, was unlocked. I locked the door and then looked through the peephole. The man wasn't there. My parents were still awake, so I explained what happened, almost hyperventilating and fighting tears. My dad went outside to have a look around the front of our house, but he said that he didn't see anyone. We looked out every window in the house and didn't see the guy. It took me a long time to fall asleep that night. I kept thinking for sure that I would hear a window break at 3 a.m., or I'd wake up to see the guy standing over my bed. But I didn't. I woke up the following morning with nothing else strange happening. From then on, my mom drove me to and from work, and every time she did, I always looked around for the guy, but I never saw him again. I was about 13 years old when this incident occurred, so it was about 8 years ago. My family and I were on a vacation in Orlando, and were staying at the Nickelodeon Hotel. Very cool place, nice water parks and nice rooms. I was with my family, my mom, my dad, my brother, and my 2 sisters. I'm the oldest of the kids. We were at Universal Studios for the day and got back rather late. On the way to our room, my parents were carrying all the merchandise we bought, which was a lot because they had 4 kids, so they kind of fell behind walking. Me and my 2 sisters, around ages 8 and 6 at the time, all got ahead of them together. My parents and my brother, about age 10, were behind us. The elevator was just around the corner. My sisters and I got to it first. The elevator opened just as we were walking around the corner. As we were walking around the corner, a man stepped off the elevator. I barely got a look at him because as soon as he saw me and my sisters, he immediately got back on the elevator without missing a beat. I should have known that that was not a good sign, but unfortunately, I was a little slow back then, so it never occurred to me that this guy was trouble. Plus, my parents were not there to see the man, so they never stopped us from getting onto the elevator. My sisters were rushing to get on the elevator because they were at the "I want to press that button" age. We all get on to see that man standing with his head facing the ground, both hands behind his back, and standing in the back of the elevator. He was very creepy looking. He had brown hair that reached the middle of his neck and looked like he hadn't showered in weeks. He looked like he was in his late 40s or early 50s because he had many wrinkles on his face and a creepy grin. He was wearing black jeans, a red, black, and white flannel, and a black turtleneck underneath. Keep in mind, we are in Florida, and this was a hot night, so it was weird that he was wearing all these layers. My youngest sister goes to press the 4th floor button, but all of the buttons were lit up already. I wish I could say that that was what made me realize we were in trouble, but it didn't click just yet that this guy pressed all of the buttons. I held the door open for my parents and brother, and then my mom looked at the guy. I will never forget the face she made. She had a huge smile on her face looking at my brother, but when she saw the man, that smile instantly dropped. I saw the look of terror in my mom's face. My dad even gave a strange look at the guy, like he knew to watch out for him. That was the moment when I realized that this man was up to no good. Once the elevator doors closed, my parents stood on each side of the man, staring at him, just waiting to jump into action in case he made a move. My brother asked my sisters out loud, "Why did you guys press all the buttons?" And the older one of my 2 sisters, still completely oblivious to what was happening, blurted out, "That guy did it." and pointed right at the man. My mom let out a nervous giggle. The elevator was slow, but finally got to the second floor. The man quickly got out of the elevator and went down the hallway. As soon as he left, my mom quickly closed the doors, and we continued up. We stopped at the third floor, closed the doors, then got to our floor, the fourth floor. My parents made sure we stayed with them this time. We got to our room, and that is when my parents started to freak out. My dad called the front desk to warn them about what happened so they could check it out. That was the last we ever saw of the man. We don't even know if the people at the hotel found him. All I can say now is I'm glad my family and I are still alive. God only knows what he would have done to one or all of us if my parents weren't there. I live in a neighborhood. Well, it's more of a highway with houses at the side of the road. I wouldn't recommend walking, since there's no sidewalks. I wish I gave myself that warning 2 years ago. I had some friends with me at the time, a boy and 2 girls. Let's call them Dan, Sarah, and Hazel. We decided to make our little squad of explorers, exploring forests and abandoned structures and such. Today is our first exploration, an abandoned house just at the very end of my neighborhood. So we start walking. We avoid the road by walking on the tall grass, which was very unpleasant, on the side of the road. We reached the house. I looked up the house a year after we did this and learned that it was built in the 1940s and was owned by a man who abandoned it after having to live in the nursing home. This was the 80s though, and the house had been left alone since. We were outside for a little while, and then Dan said that we should go inside. I was excited, but Sarah was not very happy. She sat on the moldy wood staircase and had to process everything before she went in. I can't blame her. What if there were squatters inside about to ambush us? We decided to check out the well. It was a stone, round well, which looked kind of like the well in The Ring. There was a piece of old wood covering the top, and Dan decided to be super reckless and stomped on the wood like a maniac. His leg fell through the small opening, and if he would have fell in, we would have been in big trouble. He lifted his leg out of the opening and acted like nothing just happened. I couldn't imagine. He almost fell down a well with what I saw were sharp rocks at the bottom, and he just brushed it off. We got a little carried away and started throwing random stuff down the well. Figurines, rocks, fake flower pots, etc. Then we went inside the house. When we went inside, a very strong odor emitted from the door. It didn't just smell like old house. It smelled like a plumbing accident. It was very gross. But smells aside, we came across a bunch of weird things. Clothes packed in a freezer, a fireplace with dolls inside, an upside-down table. It kind of looked like an art museum. We were very happy to find lots of vintage things inside of every cabinet and drawer. Things started to get kind of eerie. We entered a bedroom, and the roof was caved in. Clothes with stains everywhere. And worst of all, a black ooze was lined across the ceiling. I was going to vomit at this point. We also heard some distinct chewing sound. We left the room and then froze when we saw a shadow at the corner of the door. But it moved fast and then bolted into the room that it was standing next to. We heard a huff, followed by a cough, which was enough for us to leave the house, but as the dumb kids we were, we stayed on the premises. A man, who wore a scruffy-looking shirt with torn gym shorts, eventually opened the front door. We froze. How was he there and we didn't notice him? The mood turned from scary to horrific as he lifted his arm to reveal a chunk of raw meat of where his skin used to be, with the blood still dripping from it, And then we heard from somewhere else in the house, "Get the hell out of here." And we disappeared back down the road. I haven't told my parents this story, but probably will sometime in the future. I don't want to be lectured again for doing things that could have killed me and harmed the people around me. I haven't heard anything about that house ever since. I can't imagine what the people inside that house would have done to us if they had caught us. This happened back in the summer of 2016. My old family friend that I have known since elementary school was going on vacation, and his parents asked me to watch their dog and cat while they were away for 2 weeks. They have always paid me well and allowed me to stay at their house, eat any food in the house, and just relax, which was nice. To give an idea of where they live in a country neighborhood. It's not just some house, somewhat close to the countryside. It was an actual neighborhood 2 miles out from town. The neighborhood was decent and quiet, and it didn't seem to have anything odd about it. I was working at a factory during that summer, second shift, from 3 p.m. to 12 p.m. Weekends aside, I was only able to go out to the house to take care of the animals in the morning and the early afternoon. The first creepy occurrence happened only 2 days in. I got off work and went over to the house to let the dogs out. The dogs were outside for about 10 minutes, and after checking everything to make sure the animals' food and water were good for the night, I let the dogs back in and was laying on the couch trying to decide whether or not to stay the night at the house. It was around 12:45 or so, and I was getting tired while watching TV. But I heard something. The house is normally quiet, and the animals do not make much noise. So this sound was weird. At first it was faint because of the sounds of the TV, and it slowly got louder. At first I thought it was one of the dogs doing something, and I realized that it was coming from the bedroom hallway. I was listening closer at this point, and I realized the noise was slow footsteps, and it seems like whoever it was trying to be quiet. By the time I realized this, the person was almost at the end of the hall, walking into the front living room. I was fearing that this was not my tired mind playing tricks on me. It was too clear compared to times that I was imagining things. I was frozen on the couch, listening as the footsteps got closer. The person continued walking through the front living room and stopped in the middle of the kitchen. I was too afraid to move because the person might hear me. It felt like the person was just standing there for 5 minutes, but it was really only about 30 seconds. The person then turned around and slowly walked back through the hallway, and as they walked, the sound of the footsteps faded away and were drowned out by the sounds of the TV. I was trying to convince myself that it was all in my head, and I started to calm down. Then, I heard the master bedroom sliding door to the back deck slowly shut. I was again frozen for a moment, and then checked to make sure the living room sliding door was locked. I saw that it was, and then I quietly went to the knife block in the kitchen and grabbed a big knife to defend myself, and then slowly began to clear the house room by room, because I don't know if the person really left. I should have called the police and told them, but I had no proof, only the sound of footsteps. I cleared each room to make sure that no one was in the house. When I checked the master bedroom and cleared it, I checked the sliding door, the one that I heard shut earlier. The lock was broken. I left the house immediately after putting the knife back and leaving a light on for the animals. I told my parents about it, and they laughed it off, saying that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But I refused to believe that, because it was too clear to be my mind. The final creepy and scary occurrence happened only 2 days after the last event. I was at the house around lunch, and a little unnerved about the night I experienced a couple days prior. One of the dogs at the time had a peeing issue where he would get excited and pee himself. I had picked him up to let him outside, and he had peed on my jeans. I was annoyed, but I could clean my jeans, so it wasn't a big deal. So I let the dog out and had taken my jeans off to clean them. I was standing at the counter in the kitchen scrubbing my jeans when an old man suddenly walked in from the laundry room and stared at me. He had a creepy smile on his face. We stared at each other for around 30 seconds, and I was glancing at the knife block knowing that if he tried something, then I needed to get to the knife to defend myself. I then yelled at him, "Who the hell are you?" He's taken back for a moment, and then says that he's the family's neighbor and wanted to see who was at the house, since the family didn't say who was watching the animals. I responded, "How do I know that's supposed to be true?" "I can call them and verify that it's true if you like." I responded back, "I will call them, and I will put the phone on speaker for you to talk to them." He agreed, and I made the call. I talked to the mother and asked if the name the guy gave me was true and that he was their neighbor. She said yes, and then I put the phone on speaker. They talked and she apologized to me about the scare and that he won't be coming by again. He wrote down his phone number on a piece of paper if I needed something, and then left. When I take the phone off speaker and talk to her again, she mentions that he had done this to a girl previously and again promised that it would not happen again. After getting off the phone with her, I was thinking about the event and the previous one. I can only guess that it was the old man that had walked through the house that night. Even though he may not have done anything or had any bad intentions, both of them were very creepy experiences. At the time of this event, I was 18, living in a large house in a wealthy area of England. It was the Easter holidays, and my parents were away in France, leaving me at home to study for my upcoming exams. I had always enjoyed having the house to myself, and was looking forward to being able to cook whatever I wanted, watch whatever movies I wanted, and study in peace. I had little reason to be fearful, as our house was big, modern, and separated from the local village by a very long driveway. I really enjoyed the week. I would eat instant noodles and revise during the day, going out with my friends, and then watch Netflix till late into the night. We had had a lot of thunderstorms around this time, and the heavy rain and wind would set off the burglary alarms, much to my annoyance. I never thought anything of it, and would dismiss any alarm going off as wind, so I would sleepily turn it off. On Saturday afternoon, a sound startled me from my revision. It sounded like something had hit one of the upstairs windows. I turned off my music and listened. Thinking I must have imagined it, I turned my music back on. 5 minutes later, there was another noise coming from upstairs. It sounded like something had been knocked over. This time, I jumped up, heart thumping, and racking my head for a plausible explanation. But this time, one wouldn't come. I sat frozen for a minute before remembering that I could access the home CCTV imaging from the family computer. I checked the last hour, and there was nothing. So I instantly relaxed and laughed at myself for being so scared. Little did I know, my jumpy instincts were about to save me. I started cooking dinner. The kitchen faces a set of glass doors on the far side of the room, and it was now nighttime, so the glass reflected the light of the room and the attached hallway. I'm in the middle of serving up the food when I glance up to see not only my reflection, but one of a man standing in the hallway. He was short and scruffy, and had something I could not make out in his hand. He was staring at me through the reflection, motionless. My body went into flight mode. I ran across the kitchen to the back door and flung myself through it, running terrified down the road. Fortunately, I had my phone on me and called the police. I didn't see the man emerge from the house as I hid behind a bush in the driveway. Everything felt like a blur as the cops checked the house. They found nothing, and I started wondering whether I had just imagined it. It wasn't until an hour later that I found out the information that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The police checked the CCTV and found the footage of the man entering the house. He entered on Thursday night, 2 days before this incident happened. The person was found soon after and identified as a local homeless man. The incident was expected to be a burglary gone wrong. He was sentenced and is now no longer a threat. However, I will never be comfortable being home alone again. It all started and ended the day after I took my last final at this community college. I don't know if he was a stalker or if it was a break-in gone weird. So from the beginning, I was so nervous that I was going to fail this one class and was not going to be able to receive my AA degree. Later in the day, I was out at the pool at my apartment complex with some friends and my roommates when I checked my phone and saw that I passed my class. I got so excited, I told everyone we were celebrating because I was the last one to have a final. It was 3 days before I got to walk and graduate with this degree that I had decided we should have some fun before we all went our separate ways. As it got later into the night, we decided not to go out and to stay in. We invited a couple more people over and went on with the night. Around 2 in the morning, people started to leave and head to bed, and the only people left were my 2 roommates, both of the people they were dating, and one other friend. We were still messing around, and because our apartment was on the first floor and next to the pool, we went to go night swimming. As soon as we were done with that, I was ready to just hang out and be inside for the rest of the night. My roommates and the other friend all left to go somewhere else for a while, which was fine. Nothing out of the ordinary for me to be home alone. I got some food and went to my room to hang out until they got back. The way my room is set up in our apartment, it's all the way in the back, farthest away from the front door and the patio door. My room is behind the kitchen, and you'd have to go through the whole apartment to get there. Because our apartment was in the front of the complex and near the pool, it was near the front gate at the time. The gate was left open because it was broken. I have never had an issue with living this close up front until this night. My room was one big window, and you can easily see inside my bedroom when I don't have the blinds or curtains shut. I had a closet with mirrored doors, which if you look in through the window, you can see every part of my room in it. So while I was waiting for my friends to get back, I fell asleep. The last time I looked at the clock, it was 3:30 in the morning. Also, a key part in this story, my bedroom light was on when I went to sleep. The next time I woke up, it was around 5:30 a.m. There were slow flashes going off, like there was a strobe light on in the corner of my room. I woke up really confused and thought it was my friends coming back to mess with me. Once my eyes got more adjusted because the room was now dark, I realized in fact that it was not my friends messing with me, but a man who was at least 6 foot tall, wearing a green hoodie, standing in the corner of my room by my closet, holding a phone up taking pictures of me. I don't think he realized I had woken up, and when reality sunk in, I said, "What the hell?" And instead of coming at me or running out of my room, the man put the phone down and walked out of my room, not saying anything, and not in a panic at all. Just walked out. Me, being dumb, ran after him, yelling, "Hey!" I tried to follow him out, but once I got to the front door, I didn't see him anywhere. I ran back inside and woke up all my roommates, asking if they were messing with me. When they said no, I called the police. I looked around my room and saw the only thing missing was my laptop. The weirdest part about that was the fact that my laptop was in the farthest part of my room, and outside in the kitchen on the counter was 3 other laptops, 2 wallets, and a $300 speaker. but the only thing missing from the whole apartment was my laptop. Later on, I found out that the front door and the patio door were never locked that night when everyone got back, and that the police couldn't find the guy or my laptop. What made things worse was that the SIM disk from my camera was in the laptop, so all my personal photos from that camera were now accessible to this guy. Some things I saw a couple days later while I was getting ready to move out freaked me out even more. Like I said earlier, if you looked in my window, you could see my closet mirrors and see just about my whole room. One thing that was super noticeable was my tapestry. It was a very distinct and different kind of tapestry. It had 2 wolves howling up to a moon and is all black and white. One day when I was packing my car, it was getting dark, and I happened to look up. I noticed in the apartment above mine through the blinds on the wall was the exact same tapestry as the one that was in my room. In the end, the guy was never found, and I never saw his face, which freaks me out to this day, and I hope I never come across him again. I never got my laptop back, and never found my SIM disk to my camera. My best advice to anyone in a college town is no matter what, always lock your doors and windows, because you never know who you could wake up to. When I was 12, I attended summer camp to learn how to ride horses. We were going to be away from our parents for 4 or 5 nights. I was really excited because I always wanted to learn how to ride a horse due to my love for animals. But I was also nervous about being away from my family and around strangers for that long. Most of it was amazing and everything I dreamed of. However, the one night labeled Sleep Under the Stars is an experience that I don't think I will ever forget. That night, we had to leave our bunks and go outside to sleep in tents. I hated tents, but everyone else was doing it, so I figured I would play along. There were a lot of activities that took place before bed. We are able to sit by a campfire, make s'mores, and tell stories. When it came time for bed, it was 4 of us to a tent, and I could already tell I wasn't going to get much sleep. I just couldn't get comfortable and was wishing it was morning. The other people in my tent seemed to pass out almost immediately, which left me to sit there and try to count sheep in the dark. There were a lot of tents in a small area due to the fact that everyone in the camp was sleeping outside for one night. I was starting to get a little drowsy when I hear what sounded like footsteps outside my tent. I was right near the mesh window of the tent because I tended to get hot and was hoping the cool breeze would help me sleep. The footsteps got louder, but I tried to ignore them, presuming it was a counselor or one of the camp leaders. But then, I felt a presence right outside the tent. It was like someone was kneeling right outside the mesh window. I gathered the courage to look outside the window, and there was something outside. I didn't look long enough to see what it was, but something was there. It was silent at first, but then I heard whispering, just mumbling and whispering for minutes and minutes without a break. I couldn't really make out the words because it was so soft, but I could definitely hear something. I thought I could hear the words Savior, Sacrifice, and Wept. I felt like I heard the word wept a lot, but like I said, I couldn't really make it out. Every so often it would stop, and I would peek my head out of my sleeping bag to check and see if someone was there, and the figure was always still there, right outside the mesh window. On and off I could hear the whispering and mumbling all night. I tried several times to wake up someone else in my tent, but it didn't work. Eventually, during one of the moments of silence, I must have dozed off. As scared as I was, I have no clue how I was able to fall asleep, even ever so briefly. I checked the window again, and nothing was there, but about 5 minutes later, I heard a loud shriek and a gust of wind. When I woke up the next morning, I asked everyone if they heard or experienced anything similar to what I did during the night. No one heard or saw anything other than me. I know I wasn't asleep, and that I absolutely saw and heard things that night. I don't want to say it wasn't human, because nothing gave me that idea. But what type of person would have knelt by our tent and mumbled under their breath the entire night? As scared as I was at that time, I'm glad I never had another experience like that again. So the events of this story happened to me several years ago during the last vacation my family and I ever took during summer break. Every year we used to drive a couple of hours away from my hometown to a beautiful tourist area near the ocean with lots of great seafood. This year was no different, but we decided to leave in the middle of the night when my dad got out of work so that we could be there by 7 a.m. and have the entire day at the ocean. The first part of the trip was great. I slept for a little bit, as did my sister and my mom. I live on the northeastern coast of the United States, and for a huge stretch of that trip, it is just trees and mountains. Of what I could see, it was actually very relaxing and soothing to try and sleep to. A little after 3 a.m., I was woken up by my dad, who kind of loudly shouted some curse words. I asked him if everything was okay, and he said in an almost nervous voice, "Yeah, honey, go back to sleep." Without asking any other questions, I closed my eyes, and almost immediately after, my eyes were open again, because my dad swerved the car so erratically, I thought my sister was going to go through the window. This is when things started to turn for the worst. My mom woke up and yelled at my dad, and that's when we found out what was happening. My dad had told us that there had been a Jeep of some kind behind us for about an hour. They were riding our tail, and every time my dad switched lanes, they would as well. This was a time before cell phones were popular, so we couldn't just call the police. We decided to stop at the next rest area and call the authorities. We saw a sign that said, "Rest area 2 miles." That seemed like forever away, now that we knew that whoever this was really messing with us. And if they had truly been following us for an hour, then this was more than a joke, and definitely somebody who intended to harm us. 2 miles came, and we pulled into the 24-hour rest area. We pulled right into the front, and the Jeep followed us. I have never been so scared in my entire life. My mom, sister, and I got out of the car to go inside and call the police, while my dad tried to defend himself. I'll never forget what I saw. It was a navy blue Jeep, and had 5 people inside. They all had white masks on that had different smiling artwork all over them. All 5 of the people got out of the Jeep and just stood there waving at my dad. One of the figures looked like it was holding something, but I honestly couldn't be sure. I still can't believe the luck of what happened next. A patrol car just happened to pull in, and the masked people got back in the Jeep and drove away. We flagged down the cop and explained what had happened and gave him our statement. We ended up staying at the rest stop until dawn and continued with the rest of our trip. I wish I could explain the horror to you of seeing a car full of people with those masks on. Why the hell would they follow us for an entire hour just to scare the hell out of us? And what would have happened if that patrol car hadn't shown up when it did? This happened between 1989 and 1990, and I was about 8 years old. To this day, I still get chills thinking about it, and I wonder if in some way unknown, it changed me. My parents had a house in the inland empire of Southern California, and at the time, my brother hadn't been born yet, so I was still an only child. To give you a layout, my parents' house was a 2-story, located in a cul-de-sac. On the bottom floor there was 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, the living room, and the kitchen. The second floor was just the master bedroom and bath. All you could see from the street was the garage and one of the bedroom windows on the bottom floor, and the window of my mom's bathroom on the second floor. To get to the front door, you had to walk along the cement pathway that ran along the side of the house. The backyard was beyond that point. My bedroom at the time was the bedroom next to the front door. My blinds weren't completely down to the bottom of the window. There was about a 6-inch gap with nothing covering it. I was pretty young, so I didn't really care much about it then. The bed was in the middle of the wall across from my bedroom door, and to the left was the window. According to my mom, this all happened right before midnight. My mother was asleep in her room upstairs, and my dad was a police officer that worked nights in another city. I was fast asleep in my room, and out of nowhere, I suddenly awoke, looking up at the ceiling. I don't know what woke me, or if I just popped awake on my own. After my eyes adjusted to the night lights of my bedroom, I sat up and started looking around. All of a sudden, something caught my eye at the window, in the gap. First, I thought it was the street light reflecting on the window, but I knew for a fact that there was only one street light, and what I was looking at was 2 obvious glowing spots that were spaced apart, as if on someone's face. Then I thought, is that a cat looking at me? And yes, I vividly remember thinking these things, trying to debunk this at 8 years old. I had remembered then that my cat Chelsea's eyes would reflect at night, but this looked different. The cat's eyes would almost have different colors when reflecting. These were 2 very solid, bright, white, glowing eyes, looking straight at me. I just stared at them frozen, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. I couldn't see a face at all. The eyes were just so bright that nothing else stood out. That void, or face, around the eyes looked blacker than the night. I thought again, if this was a cat, how was it looking through my bedroom window, which was at least 4 feet from the ground? This is the moment the creepiest thing happened, and it will forever be burned into my brain. I got off the bed and got on my knees to get a closer look at this so-called cat, when at this moment, the faceless pair of glowing white eyes begins to slowly and steadily tilt to the side. Eyes still locked on me, not blinking once. The feeling of dread and fear shot through my body. Completely terrified, I bursted into tears immediately and ran down the hallway, through the living room, and up the stairs to tell my mom. Although I was going as fast as I could, it felt like it took forever. When I got to my mom, I was so upset, I couldn't get any words out. Tears were streaming down my face, and my mom was becoming seriously concerned at this point. She was able to calm me down just enough for me to get out the words, "Someone, something, in my window." "Are you sure?" my mom asked. I cried out, "Yes." She didn't even go to look. She just called the police. I don't remember the time it took for them to arrive, or what they said, because I was so exhausted. I finally fell asleep in my mom's bed. I do remember faintly waking up to a knock on the door, and then my mom going to open it. The cop speaks to her, and I hear her say, "Okay, thank you, good night," and she shut the door. "Did they find it, Mom?" I asked, half asleep. "No, honey, he said he couldn't find anyone." It's safe to say that the next day my whole window was covered. Fast forward years, and I'm in middle school now. Every now and then I would think about that night. Sometimes I wondered if that moment was real, if those eyes were really there, those unforgettable white eyes. One day a random thought came up, and I asked my mom if she remembered that night. She told me, yes, of course. Why? I don't know, just wondering, I guess, I said. Then my mom proceeded to say, well, I never told you this, but when the deputy came out that night, he told me they made it a priority to go to our house as soon as they could, because not very long before I called 911, they received another call from someone else, reporting that someone was looking in their window, in our neighborhood. Hearing that sent chills down my spine, and to this day I wonder who or what was looking at me that night. Two years ago, my wife and I purchased a small property on the lake for the family to spend the summer months away from the hustle and bustle of the city. As soon as kindergarten concluded for the year, my wife and I packed up our belongings and our 5-year-old son to set off for our new summer vacation home. My wife is a biologist, and she would be able to work from home due to our location and research she could do from our property. Our family is fortunate that she has such a successful job, which allows us the freedom to live comfortably. Unfortunately for me, we have moved a lot over the last 10 to 15 years, and I have not been able to stay with the same company for an extended period of time. This new town had one small grocery store that seemed to be the main location that everyone used for shopping. It also seemed to be a hotspot for tourists who would visit once the weather turned warm. Luckily for me, I am a trained butcher from jobs I had from my early 20s, so finding work was usually not very difficult. I applied for a job at this small store and got the job almost immediately. There would be 2 butchers on staff, myself and the guy who ran the store, Will, the same person that hired me. For the first few weeks, he seemed like a pretty quiet and laid-back guy. I would get to work every day shortly after 7 a.m. He never really cared that I was usually 5 minutes late. He was about 6 foot tall, greasy black hair, and a huge nose. He had really small, green, beady eyes. His voice was really low and rumbled a bit when he talked, and he had baby-looking teeth. Like when he smiled, you could see a whole mess of teeth. After the first few weeks is when I noticed things started to get a little odd. His temper would get out of hand, and he would explode on me, seemingly out of nowhere, and then 5 minutes later be totally cool again. It didn't really bother me too much because he was technically my boss, and I just assumed maybe he had some kind of anger issues. I'm not one to judge. After these first few weeks of little outbursts, they began to get more uncomfortable. He would start saying things like, "You better get this done when I leave, or you'll be sorry," or mumble things like, "Sometimes I think you'd be more helpful to me if you were dead." This stuff made me uncomfortable, but again, I just assumed that maybe that's how he managed. I've met a lot of old butchers during my time in this business, and some of them are really intense individuals, so I figured this was one of the same. Fast forward to a day when I showed up to work 15 minutes late. I got caught in a traffic jam, and unfortunately, there isn't really alternative routes to get to the store. I showed up, and Will was just standing in the meat cooler staring at me. He had a black apron on, covered in blood from cutting all morning, with the huge butcher knife still in his hand. I tried to apologize, and before I could speak, he put his hand up to silence me, and said in his deep voice, "This will be the last time you're late. The last person to disrespect me." And he kind of paused for a moment and looked down to the ground, and then finished by saying, "Never mind. Just don't be late again." The next few days he was very quiet, like something was bothering him, but to me it was great not having to hear him complain about everything. He left early one day, and told me to just make sure I cut a few extra things and to clean the meat room. It was about 7 p.m., and I was about to call it a night and head home, until I noticed something. In the back corner of the meat cooler, we had what was called bone cans. This is a waste can where you dispose of the bones and trimmed fat. Coming out of the bottom of one of the cans was a small pool of blood. Now, ordinarily, this wouldn't be a huge deal because I see this a lot with my job. But this pool looked fresh, and the smell was real bad. I tried to move the can, and it was much heavier than it usually was. They get picked up once a week, but this week they were a day late for some reason. I took the lid off and almost passed out due to the smell. I also noticed meat in there that was a strange color, and again, a lot more blood than usual. I put the lid back and left that night, trying to figure out what the heck was in that can and why it smelled so bad. I've been in this business for a long time, and I've smelled bad meat before, but this was so bad. The next day I came in, and Will was standing in the cooler again, and he looked very angry. He came at me with a crazed look in his eye and knife in hand and said, "What do you think you saw in that can?" He started to poke my chest with his finger and say in a really hostile and defensive voice, "Come on, pal, tell me what you saw. I know you were digging. Just tell me what you think you saw." His voice started to turn into a yell, and this is where I decided to call it quits. Once you put your hands on me, I'm done. The crazy thing is, I don't even know how he knew I looked into the bone can. Maybe I left the lid ajar? I couldn't remember. I left and he actually followed me to my car. Not to apologize, but to keep on hammering me about the bone can. I drove off and looked in my mirror, and he was standing in the parking lot, still yelling at me. Now, the reality is, I didn't actually dig or even look in the can longer than a few seconds. I drove home immediately, and my wife, of course, supported me and was happy to let me just spend the rest of the summer break with my son being a stay-at-home dad. About a week after the incident where I quit, I was awoken in my recliner in my living room close to 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning. I was woken up by lights outside that had driven by the property. My wife was already gone for the day, and my son was sleeping. All the lights in the house were off, and I made my way to the window. There was a massive red pickup truck parked outside my house. Now, the scary part is there was nobody inside the truck, and even though I couldn't make out a lot of the details, the truck looked like the one that was always parked outside of the grocery store. Will's truck. I went into my son's room and stayed there awake for the rest of the night. At about 7:30 a.m. I looked outside and the truck was gone. For the next few nights I saw that truck driving around the block, but couldn't see the driver. I told my wife what I had been seeing, and she recommended that perhaps we go back to the house in the city, as her current project was almost done. A few weeks after being back in the city, I needed to head back out to the lake to grab some of the items we forgot. When I got there, one of our windows was broken, and things were tossed around like someone had been inside the property. I did report this to local authorities, mostly to document the damage that had been done to the property. I know I don't have any proof that Will caused the damage, or that my family was actually in danger. I just know something was off about that guy, and I think next year we are planning to sell that property and find something much further away from that area. This story takes place during my high school years, when a couple of friends and I were coming home late from another friend's house. At the time, I was around the age of 15. It was the weekend of a summer night, and we were having a party at our buddy's house, who we will call C. It was a small party consisting of me and my big brother, C's girlfriend, and my best friend, who we will call Jay. Most of the night was spent playing video games, card games, watching the Eric Andre show, and lots of drinking and smoking. I was the only one of my friends who didn't smoke or drink. As it approached around 2:30 a.m., Jay and I decided it was time to make the trek back home. My brother stayed at C's as he was too drunk to walk back to Jay's, and he decided to sleep the night off. C lived about a 30-minute walk from Jay's house, and while on the same road, it was quite the journey for a sleep-deprived 15-year-old whose belly was full of Arizona tea and gummy worms. For some background, we would often go to C's house on the weekends, so we were fairly adapted to the 30-minute walk home. To cut some time of the walk, we would often pass through the city park, which was also located along the same road as C's house. During the day, this park was beautiful as there were tons of shady trees, such as weeping willows, and even a river that ran through the park, and plenty of spots to rest in the grass on a hot day. At night, however, it took on a completely different persona. It was almost completely dark, except for a few dimly lit street lamps. It was dead silent during the late hours of the night, and almost no one would be in the park around this time. While I have plenty of stories of that place, this story is focused on what we encountered just after the park. As we left the park, me and Jay wanted to grab something for the walk home. We stopped at a gas station and grabbed some snacks. When we walked inside, the young lady at the counter had me leave my backpack at the door, as we probably looked a little more than sketchy, being two stoned-looking teenagers crawling into the bright lights of the gas station, eyes squinted at 3 a.m. I complied, and we quickly grabbed our things and began to pay for our items. As she thanked us, we lazily shuffled back into the night, starting to feel exhaustion from the long night. When we stepped out, we noticed that a windstorm was starting to kick up, and was blowing quite strongly against our steps down the long road home. This is about the time I first started to feel uneasy. It was a strange feeling, almost like there was a very faint feeling of, you need to get home. Jay, who was slurping down his drink, hadn't initially noticed any weird feeling, and he was still slightly stoned and had barely noticed the strong windstorm whirling around us. We walked for several minutes until we came across that house. Along the sidewalk, set far behind a massive front yard, was a run-down and completely deserted house, with all its windows smashed, and a yard so unkempt that the thick grass nearly hid the front door. I glanced at the house, now starting to feel more unease settle over me. The sidewalk in front of the house was jagged, uneven, and littered with garbage and weeds. The wind was still howling, causing the wooden shutters of the house to slam against the windowsill, causing a faint creak, followed by a loud slam. Now I know what you're thinking. This sounds like a cliché haunted house with Hollywood broken shutters and all. But the thing about this house was just how out of place it was. On both sides of the street, up and down the road, it was all well-kept suburban homes and townhouses. All the houses were pretty close to each other, and their driveways sat right up against the main road. But this house was very far back into the yard, looking rather small compared to the massive vacant lawn that enclosed it. While it wasn't anywhere near as scary as some of the other things I've experienced, it was just one thing that made me even more on edge for what we were about to witness just a few short blocks ahead. We passed the house, Jay now starting to sober up and feel discomforted by the wind, and the long last stretch that we had left. At this point, we were only about 10 minutes away from Jay's house. What we saw next was one of the most bizarre, unexplainable, and terrifying things that I've ever seen. What we saw was a very skinny man crossing the road in the distance, just far enough away where you couldn't make out much detail. He looked to be wearing some sort of women's sleeveless dress or blouse that revealed only his scrawny arms and head, covering his legs. He was very tall, and it appeared almost as if he was hovering across the street. When we saw this, Jay and I were immediately freaked out, as we haven't seen any cars pass by at all, or any people outside whatsoever since we left C's. We stopped in our tracks and we just watched this man slowly hover from one side of the street to the other. We saw him walk into a small parking lot of a business building, and he did not come back out. We used this as an opportunity to speed walk down the street and make our way to Jay's house. We stood there in fear as we stood in front of Jay's house, staring into the darkness, as the house was almost completely black as all the power had gone out, and about 3 car alarms were going off somewhere nearby. The wind must have knocked the power off. However, this was very terrifying, as after we encountered on the road just behind us, it was this moment that my gut dropped. Shit. Jay, I left my backpack at the gas station. I felt gut-wrenching dread as Jay looked at me, visibly scared. We both didn't want to go back, but we didn't want to venture through the pitch-black house either. So we decided to turn tail and run back to get the backpack, which held most of my belongings, including a PS3 that I had brought over to C's house. By this point, the wind was violent. We did not see the mysterious figure appear, luckily, but it would not last. As we neared the gas station, we came across that damn house again. This time, I kid you not, the wind stopped as we passed the house. It was dead silent just like that, and I could feel the same uneasy, dreadful feeling wash over me as we passed the house again. Something in my gut told me, do not look at the house. Do not look at the house. Just as we almost passed it, my heart stopped as I heard the wind suddenly slam shut the front door of the house, and we started sprinting to the gas station. I ran inside, the lady at the counter unfazed by our panicked looks, and I told her I forgot my bag. By this time, it is approaching 4 a.m., and we just wanted to get home. Jay asked if the lady could give us a ride home because we saw someone following us, but she said, "No, I can't leave the counter unattended. I'm sorry." She could now tell we were pretty shaken up and asked if she needed to call the police. When she said that, reality started to creep in, and we started to come to our senses. Jay politely declined and said that we would be all right, and we walked outside and looked at the time on our phones. We tried to talk ourselves out of what we just experienced, trying to chalk it up to us getting spooked over nothing, that the man crossing the road was probably just some crazy person who was lost. That road is known as a hot spot for crazies, as it covers from downtown of my city all the way to the end of the city, making it easy for transients to get from one point to another. We calm ourselves down and start to head back, still jogging as we want to get some rest before the sun comes up. Now this is where it gets really scary. We run past the house, this time on the other side of the road with no issues, but that man reappeared, this time not too far behind us. He seems to be speed walking, coming directly at us in the middle of the road, but he almost makes no movement, and you can only see his dress moving with the wind. We start to run, and the man follows, but it seems he disappears for a few blocks, and then reappears behind us again. We finally make it to the house, and the power is still out, but we full-on sprint through the front door, as the man is now right behind us. Being too scared to look behind me, I hear his footsteps scrape on the ground. It sounded like he was wearing sandals. I grab a quick glance over my shoulder as we run through the door, and I see he is no longer pursuing us. I felt a wave of relief as we finally made it inside, and we locked the door and shut off all the lights and closed the blinds. We light a candle in the kitchen, almost too scared to sleep. We look at each other and just start laughing hysterically about what had just happened. We were so freaked out by whatever the hell that man was that was lurking around in a dress at 3 a.m. in the middle of the suburbs. We just had to laugh about it, or we would be up all night talking about it, and imagining the man peering through the windows of Jay's house. We got great sleep that night, and we told C all about it the next day. It was such a weird experience that to this day, I still have no idea what I witnessed. This man was almost supernatural in the way that he moved and what he was wearing, that I sometimes feel like only I truly saw what was happening that night. Either way, I hope I never meet that man wearing the house wandering the streets at 3 a.m. ever again.
I was driving on the back roads, on the edge of city limits. It was dark, no lighting at all, a few rest stops here and there. I was meeting a woman off of Craigslist, already feeling a bit nervous. I was going pretty fast, no other cars in sight. Out of nowhere I see a guy running across the road. He was already almost right in front of my car. It looked like he was getting chased by another guy, who I didn't see until I swerved to avoid the first one while braking hard. My car went kind of sideways and hit the second guy pretty fierce, not at full speed. I heard a loud thud, but didn't actually see him get hit. My car ended up on the side of the road. The first guy seems to have kept running out of sight. He wasn't there when I got out. This was a huge red flag for me, but I just hit somebody and was worried I had killed them. I was shaky and had that sinking feeling in my stomach. I ran towards the guy who was on the floor breathing heavily. Thank God he was alive. I asked him if he was okay. He didn't respond. He just kept breathing really hard. Then I took out my phone to call 911. As I was typing the number, that's when I just heard him say, "No, don't call anyone. Don't call the cops." He said it pretty alarmed. So I just looked over at him with my phone in my hand with the flash on. I asked him if he could stand. He got up slowly with a slight limp, with my light shining on him. I could see his clothes were all tattered, and he was wearing 2 layers of clothes with the jacket, now torn at the arms. He had blood on his arms, I guess from when he landed on the ground. He said, "I'm fine. Do you have any cigarettes?" I said, "Yeah, let me go get them." I had a pack in my glove box since forever. I was an occasional smoker and only smoked with my coworker, but not in a while. We walked over to my car and I got the cigarettes and I handed them to him. Then I put my phone on the charger. The car was still on. As I did, he asked for a lighter. I said, "Yeah, hold on, let me look for it." While lighting his cigarette, that's when I asked him, "Who was the other guy?" He said, "Someone stole my backpack from me when I was sleeping." Oh, okay, he was definitely a homeless man. I felt so bad. I started pulling out my wallet. I wanted to give him all the money in my wallet out of guilt. He looked fine now, minus the blood-scraped arms, and his breathing had gotten normal. While pulling out my wallet and asking, "You sure you don't want me to call an ambulance?" That's when I felt the sharpest pain rock my face. I saw all blurry for a couple of seconds. I started stumbling. My body felt like I was about to fall over. I was dizzy. When I came to, I saw my car pulling away and driving off. He punched me and took off, left me with a pretty bad headache. I stood there in shock for what seemed like an eternity. I reached for my phone out of instinct. Then I remembered I left it charging. Crap. I reached under my jacket to see if my gun was still on me. I felt relieved when I felt my gun on my side. Okay, good. At least I'm not out here defenseless. I kept walking down the road endlessly, hoping to find somebody. I'm pissed off and I'm scared at this point. A few good miles later, I see some lights. As I get closer, I see it's one of those public restrooms, with nothing else in sight. But that's good, there might be a payphone. Now what do I see next? I couldn't believe my eyes. There's a car that looks just like mine parked right out front. I take a peek. The guy that took my car is asleep. Looks like he cleaned his arms off. No jacket. That moron, he could have kept driving, but I'm glad he didn't. I took out my gun and tried to open the door. It's locked. I tried all the doors, but they were all locked. I didn't want to wake him up by banging on the car, because I was afraid he was going to drive off again. I looked all over the ground, nothing to break the window. So I holster my gun, take off my jacket and wrap it around my hand. I smash through it, glass spilling everywhere. The guy jerks awake and starts fumbling around. All the while, I drop the jacket and rapidly unholster my gun again. I'm pointing my gun right at his head. He says, "Please don't shoot me," instead of saying sorry for what he did. I tell him to get out of the car and walk towards the wall with his back turned. So I backed up and he complied. I tell him not to move, and then I ask him where my keys are. After I get my keys from him, I drove off, with glass all over my car. I never called the police because I had hit him earlier, and then because I pulled a gun on him. I was scared and worried about the legality of it. Also, I had bought it from Arms List, but the seller never signed the bill of sale, only I did, so I was sketched out about that as well. Last thing I need is them checking out my gun after he tells them about it, and finding out the guy who sold it to me reported it as stolen. I probably would have been fine calling them, but I was worried, and I never met the Craigslist girl. I ended up only just going home. I'm a college-aged female, and used to work at a unique Irish pub. Despite me living in a college townish area, this pub's primary clientele is men and women 40 and over. Seeing another young person is rare. The pub is owned by 3 older men who only ever come in to get free drinks for them and all their old friends, while treating the staff like dogs, but expecting us to have their every order memorized to a T. This was one of those nights. I had the closing serving shift on a Friday night, which meant if my sections were clear and everything was cleaned, I would clock out at 11 p.m. It had been a painfully slow night. Hadn't had a table in over 2 hours. Finished all my cleaning, set up for tomorrow's day shift, since there was nothing else to do, and nearing clock-out time around 10:55. I was tired and just wanted to go home, talk with the other bartenders as you do, when in walks one of the owners with 30 of his best friends. They came in with no warning and crowded my entire section of tables. The bartender even tried to hide behind me so the owner wouldn't ask him to stay, because he always demands a server, even if his butt never sits at the table, and 50-50 shot you're getting the 20% tip off him. Unfortunately, he did not spot me, looked me in the eye and asked, "So are there any servers still out that can help us?" I cut my losses, figuring I'd at least make a little bit of a tip off the rest of the group if I played nice. You can believe I cocktailed the heck out of that party. No one's beer was ever empty. If I saw them a little green, I would ensure they found a ride out, handing out waters when I could tell things were out of hand. Food was in and out, light speed. Everyone had a great time. It turned into an okay night as the group would slip me cash here and there as a thank you. The night was finally rolling to an end, when 3 of the men called me over. I walked over with a big smile despite being utterly exhausted, sweating like a pig, around 2 a.m. I don't get too bothered by creepy old men talk, especially if I'm constantly working in a place like that, and normally shrugging it off. But I do not put up with bullcrap from people, no matter who they are, and will stand up for myself if needed. This was actually a funny conversation I had that turned creepy. Old guy number 3 was a 78-year-old man who I had served a minimum of 5 beers and 2 shots to. Guy number 1 says, "So forgive us if this is a little crass of a question, but it's been a funny debate all night, and we need a final woman's opinion. Beard or no beard?" I say, "Oh, well, of course a beard. I gotta say I love my fiance's beard." Guy number 2 says, "But doesn't it feel weird when you kiss him? Tickle your lips or scratch? Leftover food?" I say, "Not as much as you think. It can be a little scratchy when it's a certain length, but you tend not to notice it after a while. But he does keep his clean. Do you want me to grab you a wipey since you seem to need the help?" We were all laughing. Guy number 2 says, "You know, I may take you up on that one. So if he cut his beard, would you be upset, or what?" I said, "Nope, that's entirely up to him. If anything, it just takes some getting used to, but every girl's different and may prefer different." Old guy number 3 says, as he starts petting my hair lightly, "So you like the beard, huh? The whiskers turn you on?" I say, "Yeah, I wouldn't go that far, but to each her own." He says, as he puts his arm around my waist and pulls me against his chest, leaning down into my ear before I could protest, "I bet those whiskers feel real good between those nice legs of yours too, huh? I bet your fiancé can't compete." And then he wiggles his eyebrows at me too. At that point I was so shocked and ripped myself out of his arms pretty forcefully. No one had ever said something like that to me before. He was surprised that I was pissed, but tried to laugh it off and tried hushing and talking over me when the other 2 men, clearly confused, asked what he said to me. I've dealt with creepy flirting and stalking, but nothing so blatant as that. Instead, I straight up told the other 2 what he said. They looked absolutely disgusted with him, then walked straight to the bartender and head chef to tell them what happened. They, of course, were super mad at this guy. Older brother types to all the waitresses and would help us out in a heartbeat. But by the time they walked out, the owner had collected the creep for a big group photo before they all left. I will say I did get revenge since I worked the next morning. A large group of elder women came in that turned out to be the wives of the men from the previous night. When they realized I was one of the servers who served their husbands, they asked for all the details. I feel horrible for the poor man's wife, but you could see the rage burning in her eyes when she heard what her husband said. I'm turning 22 at the end of the month, and this event happened almost a decade ago. Yet I still remember it so clearly. I still think on it often and bring it up to my family, as uncomfortable as it makes us. It reminds us on how dangerous the world really is. As a little backstory, growing up I'd always had extremely fair skin, blonde hair, and light eyes. The kind of thing that specific creeps unfortunately go for. When I was just around the bend of becoming a teenager, my older sister, who's 8 years older than me, was in the military and had been gone for quite some time now. However, she was finally coming back home to good old USA soil, a few states away at a base in Kentucky. My parents and I were excited and planned to leave for the weekend, so we could finally go and see her for the first time in years. It would only be a few days, but we were happy regardless. We ended up seeing her, of course, and had a few days to be able to go out to eat, open her accumulated Christmas presents, and go to a nearby mall in proximity to the hotel that we had been at. I've never seen someone so happy to just wear normal civilian clothes. Right from the get-go, our last night together felt odd as we walked this mall. Just one of those creepy vibes you get from an unfamiliar area. It wasn't too long until closing, and at this time frame malls closed at around 10 p.m. I'm sure you know what happens at malls. You go in and you look at everything. The 4 of us came across the last store we would be stopping at for the night before leaving. We walked in, and it's not particularly a store we'd go into. Expensive streetwear clothing. Like the pesky 12-year-old I was, I go back and forth pestering my mom and dad, walking around the store as my sister looks around as well. Suddenly my sister walks over to my mom, as I'm near my dad, and whispers something to her. A man, with a most defined black mustache I remember, had been tailing us and doing the typical retail routine. "Hi, is there anything I can help you with? Can I help you find something?" But he's being too persistent, and only asking my dad these things. The man didn't speak broken English, but his accent was incredibly thick. Perhaps Indian or Turkish, we think. My sister and mother walked out of the store, and keep eyeing back at my dad. The "alright, let's go now" look. Now me being 12, feeling even worse vibes. I don't understand why my mom and sister are wanting to leave so bad, but I start to catch up to them regardless. As my dad starts noticing us leaving, he begins to walk out as well, but the man stops him as I'm still in earshot. I find out at this point that the man has been staring at me almost the whole time, with my aloofness to the situation. He looks away from me and to my dad and asks, "So how much for the little one?" My dad, visibly confused, chuckles uncomfortably, thinking it's some kind of weird, tasteless, bad joke. My mother and sister don't hear this, and are still waiting for my dad and myself to catch up several feet away. "What?" my dad says, hoping for some kind of explanation. The man proceeded to say that he wanted to purchase me. Visibly protective dad mode now, and realizing the man is completely serious. "We don't do that here." His rising tone was palpable. He starts to hurry me away to my mom and my sister, and we start leaving as he tells them just what happened. The whole drive back to the hotel, my sister is just constantly getting more and more upset, saying if she had known, she would have killed him. And honestly, I'm not sure that there's really anything we could have done. But regardless, the entire situation was beyond uncomfortable, especially now that I realize the implications of what was going on. Needless to say, we never stepped foot in that store again. Years ago, when I was a teenager, my friend Justin and I would often go longboarding at night, as my friends and I were quite the night owls. We loved the freedom of almost never seeing another soul on the road or in the paths that we frequented, even when using main roads. It would be very rare to see a car out so late in such a rural area, and you could see and hear them coming from very far away due to their headlights and the noise of the vehicle, disrupting the peaceful silence of the night. We were really into it at the time, and would often ride our boards for miles and miles, sometimes not arriving home until the sun was up. One particular night, we decided to ride a few miles from our usual back roads to take one of our favorite hidden routes. It began with a narrow, paved path that was the only piece of land separating two sides of a long lake. It would often sink under due to rain, and we wanted to seize the opportunity to use it before it rained again and went underwater once more. It was roughly 2 miles long and was extremely relaxing to ride through due to the scenery. After making it to the end of the lake, we decided to continue moving and turn into a very close path that leads directly into a densely wooden wilderness preservation. As we came up to the first hill, we looked down at the bottom into the blackness. We both noticed what appeared to be a tiny, moving ball of dim light down there. It moved so strangely, and it was extremely difficult to make out what it was. Rather than shine our flashlights down, we curiously watched it for a few minutes, whispering to each other about what it could possibly be. All at once, the small light turned into multiple blinding lights, and extremely loud revving sounds, overwhelming our senses that had become accustomed to the dark and silence. Acting purely on fear, we instantly turned around and ran as fast as we could, hearing yelling and revving gaining behind us. By sheer luck, we managed to run off the path into a very dark, very overgrown hole in the side of a hill, overlooking where we had just come from. We decided to hide in the natural dugout of this hill, hoping the plants and darkness would be enough to protect us from whatever was happening out there. We watched our pursuers ride up to where we had originally been standing. There were 4 men, 2 on 4-wheelers and 2 on full-size motorcycles. They were yelling at each other about something, but we could not make out what they were saying due to the distance we had covered. We felt safe enough to whisper very softly to each other, and speculated who these people could be. Our first thought was they might be park rangers of some kind, although we had never seen one here in the many times that we had been through. And honestly, we doubted that this country had the budget, or even the desire to have anyone patrol the deep woods at night. Besides that, these men were on vehicles entirely inappropriate for the paved bike trails, and they were very, very angry about something. They called out to us for a while, yelling things like, "We know you're out there, and we can see you. Come on out." We stayed silent and decided to call their bluff instead of running. Eventually, we clearly heard one of the men yell, "Find them now," and smash a bottle. That had erased any of the hope that we had that they were just park rangers. We watched them split up, each of them going a different way down the series of paths of their vehicles, including the path we came from. It took us what felt like ages to even move. We were frozen in terror inside that dugout. watching the lights from the vehicles travel through the woods and paths, one of them already coming full circle and passing the point he started from. I thought about calling for help, but I was too afraid to open my phone in fear that even the smallest amount of light would give away our location. After waiting for the lights of the vehicles to reach their farthest distance yet, we finally summoned the nerve to get up and try to run somewhere far enough from these people to safely make a phone call. We ran as hard and as fast as we could through those woods. Since their headlights gave away their location on these paths, we would hide again whenever we felt that they were getting too close. Our available hiding spots were getting progressively worse as the woods became less dense, and the fear I felt waiting for one of them to drive past us while basically only being covered in leaves and plants may still be unmatched to this day. Finally, we emerged from the woods onto the intersection of two main roads, far from where we started. We ducked down into the ditch to call for help. When I opened my phone, I noticed I had recent missed calls from one of our other friends, Connor, who we were supposed to meet up with at our longboard excursion. I called him and frantically asked where he was. Luck was with us again. He hadn't given up on our plans despite us ignoring him. He was only a few miles away, already heading in our direction. I gave him the names of the two streets we were on, near the corner, and explained that we just needed to be picked up right away. He agreed to speed over to us while Justin and I waited in hiding. Thankfully, Connor arrived before any of those men did. We bolted into the back seats of his car, yelling for him to get out of there, and he took off. Relief doesn't begin to describe what I felt being safely driven home for everything I had just experienced. After explaining to Connor everything that happened, we ended up just moving on with our night and decided not to call the police. We figured they would be gone by the time any officer made it out there, and that we would only be putting ourselves at risk by admitting to breaking the law by taking this path so late at night. I still have no idea what happened or who those people were. I've been told all kinds of theories from friends and family that have heard the story. Some think we walked right up to a huge drug deal. Justin and I later admitted to each other that when the revving started, we couldn't see. Our minds both went straight to chainsaw-wielding horror movie serial killer, so I suppose it could have been much worse. But frustratingly enough, whatever those men thought we saw that made them want to catch us so badly, we never actually saw it. We'll never really know, I suppose. Years ago when I was in college, I was having lunch with some friends in this beautiful outdoor plaza, and I saw a guy that I slightly knew from class eating all alone at another table. He always seemed shy, but he looked lonely. So I said, "Hey, you're Ricky, right? From social class. Why don't you come join us?" He did, and he was still pretty shy. But everyone introduced themselves and tried to include him, and that was that. That is literally the last interaction I remember having with him, or because of him, until a few months later, when about 4 guys I barely knew cornered me at work when I was on break. They said, "You're being a real jerk to Ricky, and it has to stop." I literally had no idea what or who they were talking about. But when I said, "Who is Ricky? Are you sure you have the right person? I don't know what you're talking about," they didn't believe me. He said, "You're leading Ricky on, then blowing him off, then leading him on with promises. And he's at campus health right now being evaluated. And it's all your fault for messing with his head." I was so confused and so terrified, and these guys were so furious. And thank God at this moment, my coworker, an older woman, came out and asked what was going on. One of the guys said to her, "Your friend here has been messing with our friend Ricky, and we're here to make sure that she stops." I said, "Ricky from my social class last semester? I hardly know the guy. What are you talking about?" The presence of my older coworker definitely reduced the boy's bravado. She was pissed off and told them that she would call security and have them all arrested for harassing me, and to get out, and that she knew me and I was a good person who would never mess with somebody's head. And they had no idea what they were doing, and obviously had the wrong person, and needed to leave. But I needed to understand what was happening. So I said, "Wait, I want to know what's going on. I know Ricky and I spoke to him once in my life. What is going on? Long story short, the day I thought I was doing a good deed by inviting a lonely schoolmate to sit with me and my friends somehow made Ricky think that I was in love with him. He believed it, and since then had been having a delusional relationship with me. He believed it so sincerely that his friends never questioned it and believed it too. They believed his stories and never ever stopped to ask why he and I were never together or anything like that. I wondered at the same time if he was intentionally lying to look like he had a girlfriend, and when I didn't show up he just covered by saying I dumped him. But as I've learned more about certain psychological disorders, well, I think he actually believes his fantasies. And when Ricky had a breakdown, apparently because of my cruelty, his friends brought him to campus health and then went after me. He and they knew where I worked. That is how far this went. They knew where I was, and I had no idea any of this was even going on. That really terrifies me, that I had no idea. Do you think any of these boys ever apologized to me? No. In fact, at least one was still convinced I was lying, even though it became clear that Ricky was sick, and there was something really wrong with him. At the time it was bad enough, but years later it's even more terrifying that all this could go on and I had no idea. And it terrifies me how easily people believe total lies, and how they won't admit it when they are wrong. Thank God for my coworker and for how she stood up for me. It's so scary when people who are furious with you attack you, and you have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. It was one of the most frightening, confusing moments of my life, and I was always scared afterwards when I would see Ricky or one of his friends around on campus. I have no idea where Ricky and his friends are today, but I never, ever should have invited him over to lunch. This happened about a year ago. I was on Grindr, looking for either fun dates or new relationships. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Grindr, it's a social media app that is designed primarily for gay men, and many people use it to hook up with other men. One day I was scrolling, and I received a new message from a guy who we'll call Brian. I took a look at some of his profile pictures, read his bio, and decided that I was interested in him. We started messaging back and forth, and he seemed to be a really kind, charismatic guy who really knew how to hold up a conversation, something that is very hard to come by on the app. A few days went by and we eventually exchanged numbers. He seemed nice enough, and I wanted to see if he was as great in person as he was over text message. So I asked him if he wanted to go on a date with me. He very happily agreed. So I scheduled a date with him. The plan was that I was going to drive to his place, pick him up, and we would grab some lattes at my favorite local coffee shop. It was around 6 p.m., and I sent him a text message to tell him that I was leaving my house. To which he responded with a quaint, "I can't wait to meet you." I smiled at his supposed kindness. Then, in the middle of driving to his house, I received a phone call from him, so I picked up, and the conversation went mostly as follows. I said, "Hey Brian, what's up?" Brian said, "Hey, quick change of plans. I'm feeling tired and I would rather not go out. Would you be okay with staying at my place? We can watch some shows and order some takeout." I said, that's not really what I had in mind. I'd like to go out and do things on the first date." Brian said, "Oh, don't be such a buzzkill. Just come over. I won't show you a bad time." As he spoke on the phone, I got a really strange feeling in my gut, like something was wrong about how he talked to me. Before I met him, I imagined his voice and inflections to sound a lot more light-hearted, because the way we texted was very whimsical and fun, but over the phone, he talked as if he was in a hurry, perhaps slightly frantic. However, despite my gut feeling, I decided that I would accept his offer. Maybe he was just tired or stressed from the workday. I pulled into his driveway, and he greeted me at the door. He looked like his picture, and he was very handsome. He was wearing fashionable glasses, and his dark hair, straight hair, contrasted with his light skin. When we go inside, I was greeted by one of his roommates, who was playing Dark Souls in the living room. I wanted to be polite, so I approached the roommate and introduced myself. I didn't want to come off as rude to Brian, in case this date ended up going really well. While I'm talking with his roommate, Brian calls my name and beckons me to walk inside his bedroom. I politely excused myself and followed Brian into his room. When I walk inside, I saw something straight out of a horror movie. Only this was real and right in front of me. There were candles lit all around. And when I got a closer look, I noticed that there were several altars scattered across the room. Ancient-looking figures, animal bones, jars with unidentifiable liquids inside, some sort of dagger next to a cat's skull. The whole shebang. I don't remember all the altars, but I do remember a couple. One of them was on the floor, and there was a glass container that held some kind of yellow liquid, with animal skulls surrounding the container. Another altar was on a shelf next to his bed, and this one had a few candles surrounding some kind of doll with its eyes sewn shut and its hands missing. Now that one was creepy and bizarre. A part of me was telling me to nope the F out of there immediately, but I thought that maybe I was overreacting to someone's religious choices. I didn't know much about cult religions, so I didn't want to assume that this guy had any kind of male intent. Plus, I can be a little reactive at times, so I decided to stay and go along with the ride. When we walked into his room, I wanted to calm my nerves, and because I have a really curious mind, I decided to ask about what these altars were for. He told me that he would tell me about them later. A weird response, but again, I brushed it off my shoulders, thinking that he might just be a bit eccentric. I can be a little weird too, so I try to be empathetic and understanding. Then I point to one of the altars and ask about it. He frowns at me and scowls. "Don't touch that." His voice startled me. His intense inflections paired with his angry expression sent a lump straight to my throat, and I felt threatened. I was almost 4 feet away from the altar, not even close to touching it. And yet he just yelled at me, like a father yelling at his kid, to stop messing around at church. I was confused, and thinking I had done something wrong, I apologized. In the blink of an eye, his scowl turned into a smile, and he kindly invited me to sit with him to watch a show. What really weirded me out was the fact that his smile looked and felt genuine. He had just gotten angry, but all of a sudden, he didn't care, and served me up a really kind disposition. I was unsure of how to process what had just happened, so I just decided to sit down with him. He seemed to be acting pretty normal once this ordeal had happened, and we started to talk about ourselves. After some time, he became really sweet and soft-spoken, similar to how he was over the text messages, and we were able to share some stories about our lives. It was starting to feel like an actual first date, and my nerves subsided a little bit. I was probably just overthinking everything else. He then turns on his TV. Now, mind you, I was still a little bit freaked out by his random outburst, so I was on guard. So I offered to invite his roommate to come and hang out with us. Brian's roommate seemed like an old average Joe when I met him, and I just wanted someone else to be there to act as a buffer. I wanted to see how he would act around other people, but when I gave him my idea, he immediately shut me down, and his personality switched from easygoing to stressed and angry. He started cussing out his roommate to me, making it clear that he absolutely hated him. The switch was so jarring, I started to panic again. Then he changed the subject and started to talk about me. He said that he found me really attractive, and in the process, his fingers started to graze my thighs. I needed a second to collect myself, though, so I excused myself to get some water. When I stood up, he immediately slapped my butt and told me not to take too long. I walked out and closed the door behind me and started to make my way for the kitchen. I was hoping to chat with his roommate on the way and see if I could ask him some more about Brian. But he was asleep on the living room couch, so I just made a beeline to the cabinets in search for a cup. I thought about walking out and driving home, because I didn't appreciate his sudden touchiness, but I started getting paranoid. He had all of those altars, and he didn't tell me what they were for. I've seen some horror films about the occult, and I truly had no idea what this guy was capable of. Yeah, he was sweet at times, but he was showing me some really aggressive behavior. Who's to say that this guy isn't able to put some kind of voodoo curse on me? Yeah, it's dramatic, I know, but you can never be too sure. So I grabbed my water and cautiously head back to his room. When I walked back inside, I saw him sitting on the couch with his legs crisscrossed and his eyes closed. When I approached him, I saw his mouth moving, but I didn't hear anything coming from it. I got weirded out by this, so I called his name, but he didn't respond. Strange. I called his name a second time, and he opened his eyes, uncrossed his legs, and went back to watching the TV without at all addressing what he was doing. What was he doing? I was getting really worried, but I did what I could do to keep my cool. I didn't want to do anything to upset him or make him lose his cool. I sat next to him on the couch and we started talking. Once again, he was completely normal. Unnervingly normal. It's like I was in the room with a real-life Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, except Brian was able to switch between them seamlessly. I needed to do something, but what was I supposed to do? I couldn't call him out because he might lash out at me in some malicious way, but I also didn't want to stay because he was freaking me out. But I stay anyways, and I try to devise some plan to get out of there without making him angry. At some point he gets up to grab his phone, and I thought that I would try dishing out some of the same medicine that he gave me, so I grab his butt. Maybe it would release the tension that I was feeling. Maybe he would like it and make him less aggressive. Regardless, I wanted to try something. I made my move and gave him a cheeky butt grab. Immediately he turned around and swatted my hand away and lunged at me. He had his hands curled up in a fist, and he flung it towards my face. His fist was inches away from making a connection with my right cheek, but he stopped mid-punch. In that moment I saw that his eyes were wide open, and his facial expression was cold and emotionless. He was right in my face. My heart was beating so fast that it felt like I was seconds away from an aneurysm. He was looking directly at me, and my eyes stared back. At this moment I felt like the prey to his predator. Then he uncurled his fist, put his icy hands on both sides of my face and started to squeeze. "You're just so cute." He pulled me in and forced a kiss. I absolutely did not want to kiss him, but I was paralyzed and couldn't will myself to push him away. His words were patronizing, sort of like he was talking to a dog. And it felt even more like this because he had just scrunched my face against his. I felt disgusting kissing someone who had almost just punched me in the face, but there was nothing I could do in that moment. Again, I didn't want to risk pissing him off. He slowly pulled away, gave me another sweet smile, and sat down, pretending that nothing had just happened. Just started staring at the TV. I told myself I'm over this completely. His behavior was becoming more erratic and more unpredictable. His room was creepy. He clearly had associations with the occult, and frankly, he was scaring me. I eventually decided that I'd rather deal with the voodoo-looking altars later on than stay at his house and have to put up with the immediate danger. So I snapped myself out of the anxiety-induced trance. I stood up and told him that I was starting to get sick, and that I wanted to go home. He got angry and tried to convince me to stay the night, but I gathered my courage and insisted that it was time for me to leave. He begrudgingly let me, but it was clear that my decision upset him. I didn't care anymore. I said my goodbyes and told him that I would text him later. I got in my car and drove home, shaking and sweating. I felt relieved to get out of there, but nervous that he might try to do something. The uncertainty of it all is what truly shakes me up, but thankfully, no actual harm came to me. Who knows what would have happened if I stayed, though. I blocked Brian's number, as well as his Grindr profile, and even now, I keep my own Grindr pictures private. I haven't heard from him since, but I still fear that he's going to try and come after me, somehow, someday. Everyone has that one set of neighbors that you love to hate. They're always partying late into the crack of dawn, throwing their trash on your side of the yard, asking to borrow things. Not to gatekeep having bad neighbors, but I feel like the year of hell these neighbors caused my family was way worse than the most normal awful neighbors. I'll let you decide. It's hard to condense so much stuff into this story, and I still feel like the story will be kind of long. Setting-wise, a house across from ours was up for rent, and this would become the gateway to the hell that ensues. We knew the person who owned the house, so some of this will be stuff that she told us afterwards. The first sign of trouble started when they moved in, driving their moving truck onto the driveway and parking a nice Lexus on the lawn. For the kind of people that would come to live there, a Lexus was definitely suspect, but parking cars on the lawn became a daily habit that killed the lawn over time. Another red flag was the number of people that came and went as the weeks went by. No one knew the true amount of people that lived there, but the regulars were as follows: an overweight blonde, a somewhat more decent brunette with glasses, a hideous rat-looking punk boy, a teenage twig girl who looked like she was a prostitute in her spare time, and two small toddlers, a boy and a girl. This new addition to the neighborhood quickly claimed their spot as the loudest people in the neighborhood, with seemingly endless parties and arguments that would last for hours at a time. They had the foulest mouths you could ever imagine, and even the youngest child could be heard saying words that no younger person should ever be exposed to. Though the days were nice, we couldn't open our windows unless we wished to hear the vulgar music that was blasting through an open garage door, as one of the teens worked on a dented shell of a car every evening. A real selling point was the small toddlers would be left outside in the front yard to fend for themselves for hours on end. These people were clearly living on welfare and other such government programs, and the most annoying thing they did, come the first full month they were there, was to ask for things. The brunette lady was, more often than not, the one who showed up at our door, often with a child on her hip, one in tow behind her. The requests weren't anything weird at first, sugar, eggs, things like that, and my mom was too nice to refuse them. Then the requests became more strange. They asked for diapers, an electric griddle to make grilled cheese, which they surprisingly did return eventually, and once they asked if they could charge their phone for a while. I guess they were behind on their bills and the electricity got shut off, something that would happen a lot more frequently in the future. The highlight of this story has yet to come. All this is nothing compared to what happened next. It was a hot summer day, one that makes you feel like you are moving in slow motion and can't think properly. I just happened to look outside, and to my horror, I witnessed the young teen girl dragging a screaming toddler into the house after he had been running around outside by himself, and shut the mesh screen door behind her. I could still make out the figure of the girl, who began to kick the child and call him all sorts of bad words. I quickly called my mom, who stomped outside to tell her to stop or she would call the police. The girl called her nosy and shut the door. Just as my mom finished calling Child Protective Services, the blonde lady, her gangly teen son, and the violent teenage girl were pounding at our door, thirsting for blood. My mother slowly drew up the blinds and eased the window open a crack, stating that she would not open the door. The nasty woman then proceeds to yell at my mother for not staying out of other people's business, and that she should just F off. This went on for almost half an hour before my mom had enough. My mother calmly explained that as long as she had to witness such cruel acts and foul mouths, she wasn't going to stay out of their business, and that if they don't get off of her property, she would call the police. She shut the window and closed the blinds, despite all their curses. Not long after, the police were called for similar reasons by our other neighbors, and the family was finally given a warning and an eviction date. They stayed weeks after the water and power had been cut off. When they realized that they had to move out or be arrested, they did everything in their power to destroy and deface the house that they were staying in. The landlady was in tears as she gave my mother a tour of the now vacant house. Windows had been smashed. Sinks were ripped out and tossed into the yard, Walls were riddled with holes and foul graffiti. Toilets were backed up with human waste, and whatever they couldn't take with them was destroyed. It's been some time, and that same house has been filled with a new family, but the memory is still very fresh. I hope nobody ever has to encounter those neighbors. When I was about 13 or 14, this new guy called Jack came to my school. Now, it had a fairly large body of students, and it was situated in a heavily populated neighborhood, so no one really made a big deal out of new people. But he was quite shy and looked out of place, so I thought it would be nice if I introduced myself to him, just to show him around and make him less uncomfortable. Oh boy, was I in for a ride. Jack was very tall, and had a rather large frame for his age. At first he didn't come off as creepy, just a little bit on the awkward side, but then again that's not really out of the ordinary for hormone-ridden preteens, so no flags were raised. I don't really remember what we used to talk about at first, but he would always be around and make sure to say hi to me, and specifically me, as in he would say my name, even if I was with a group of friends he had talked to before. Looking back, I'm pretty sure he might have liked me, but I was never really into guys, so I didn't notice it at all. Things started to get weird when our art teacher gave us an assignment to decorate the covers of our sketch pads with something that we really liked and or were passionate about. Mine was probably some crappy band I listened to at the time. His was a picture of an open heart surgery. Not an illustration, not a fictional heart surgery. An actual, literal picture of a human heart in all of its gory fashion. The teacher, much like everyone else, was very put off by it, and probably had a private conversation with him. But as far as I remember, he was still allowed to keep it at a sketch pad, even if it was a little bit on the graphic side. Later I approached him and asked why that picture exactly, and he told me that he was really into cardiology and binge-watched surgery videos on the internet, and wanted to study it in college. That's still pretty weird that he would choose such an explicit image, but I guess at least it makes a little bit of sense. Right? Wrong. In the subsequent weeks, he would go on and on about how he's working a part-time internship at a hospital downtown because his grandma works there. Apparently she was a nurse, and pulled some strings to get him into the medical world, since he liked it so much. He even went as far as to wear scrubs to school one day. Obviously it wasn't true. No one in their right mind would let a 13-year-old work at a hospital. That just wouldn't happen. He seemed to believe it though, or at least he believed that he wanted me to believe it. I really don't know what was going on in his mind. At some point he asked me if I wanted to see some tools that they used at the hospital, to which I said sure, why not? Because A, I didn't think he was being serious, and B, I was starting to get scared that if I didn't play along, things wouldn't go so well for me. And to my absolute surprise, he did bring a bunch of medical tools to school. Scalpels, scissors. The kid had an entire dissection kit in his bag. I'm not sure if he brought them or stole them from his grandma. I'm leaning more towards the latter. But it's needless to say that I was, and this is no overstatement, freaked out. I still don't know why he thought bringing them to school of all places would be a good idea. But then again, we never hung out outside of class, which in retrospect was probably for the best, so he must have thought that this was his only chance to wow me with his extensive knowledge of all things surgery. I, of course, after pretending that everything was fine, and that what he did was totally normal, reported it to the principal, and they called his grandmother, who was just as shocked as everyone else to find out that her grandson had did this. I don't know what went down, but as far as I remember, he got off without consequences, and also this happened nearing the end of the school year, and after that I moved to a different place for unrelated reasons, so I didn't really think about checking. Thankfully he didn't try to hurt me or anyone else, and I think he just genuinely thought it was acceptable to bring a bunch of potential weapons to school. But I can't help but wonder what could have happened if I got on his bad side, or didn't pretend to go along with his fantasy world. He was notoriously volatile, and I guess I was just lucky he liked me. I'm pretty sure he was mentally ill. I know that he was at least depressed because so was I, and we briefly talked about it back then. But now I think that he was clearly delusional. This was almost a decade ago, so people avoided talking about mental illness, like the plague. And the school probably didn't investigate it any further, or pointed his family in a good direction, which to be quite frank really sucks. So yeah, creepy kid from middle school, I genuinely hope you're doing better. But I'll never forget our interactions, and not in a good way. A few days ago, I'm walking downtown in the mid-afternoon when I become aware of a presence walking behind me. It's a busy city and a crowded street, so I don't think much of it. But this man stands right behind me for a few blocks. I can hear his breathing behind me, becoming ragged and coarse. He's breathing heavily, and it gets heavier as he follows me. I don't want to turn around or make eye contact, but I can sense him following me. Then I hear him say it. "Honey, if you don't slow down, I'll never catch up to you." I get terrified. I feel my blood run cold and I whip around to confront him. He's big, at least a foot taller than me, and I can see on his chest one of those sticky paper ID tags. It's from a mental hospital. A mental patient has been following me for blocks and now is trying to get me to slow down. I turn away and immediately cross the street, not looking back, but he appeared to stop following me at that point. I'm just still terrified by the incident. That's how the story would be told if I were the woman, but I'm not. I'm the guy. And this is the story about how I accidentally became somebody else's let's not meet story. I have been out of the office for over a week due to a nasty bronchitis virus that utterly wiped me out. And my girlfriend, my poor loving girlfriend, who nursed me back to health, has now been stuck at home sick. And this was my first day back at work. I feel bad for her. I decided to try and do something nice for her. She's an avid player of an Elder Scrolls Online, you see, which just released a new expansion. And that expansion allowed for a new class. And she had put off getting the expansion in order to focus on picking up the slack for my illness. So I decide I'm going to go get it for her. I decide on my lunch break to go to the nearest GameStop and get her the digital code. So on my lunch I head out. Now here's the thing. The local GameStop and my office are on opposite sides of a very large hill. Remember also, I've been sick all week with bronchitis. Now I get to the GameStop, buy the digital code, and text her a picture of it along with a message, very jokingly tell her that she needs to wait till I get home to play it, because I'll never catch up otherwise. Then I start heading back to the office, and I start walking back up the hill. And this is where the heat and the humidity and the fact that I'm walking uphill after, once again, having bronchitis starts to take its toll. And I begin to, I'm quite sure very audibly, breathe heavily. I also just so happen to be walking the exact same path of a woman who has ended up walking right in front of me. And I've now been walking behind for a couple of blocks. Two important things about me. First, I'm a tech nerd, so I have the smartwatch, the Bluetooth earbud, the whole 9 yards. Second, I'm a big guy, in the 6'2", 240 pounds college athlete who still works out a lot and could probably beat you up sort of way. I'm a scary looking guy. I'm a gosh dang teddy bear who posts pictures of his cat on Reddit and wouldn't hurt a soul. But I am fully aware that in the wrong context, let's say you're a 5-foot woman and you think I'm following you, could be freaking terrifying. So what's the tech nerd relevance here? Smartwatch, Bluetooth. My girlfriend calls me, and I tap on my watch to pick up the call without taking the phone out of my pocket, which syncs directly to my Bluetooth earbuds. My girlfriend hears that audible chime on her end, and knowing I've picked up, launches into how she couldn't wait and is already playing without me. And that's when I, quite jokingly, as I'm glad she's filling up to it, tell her, "Honey, if you don't slow down, I'll never catch up." And the woman ahead of me freaks out and whips around, and I immediately realize, oh my god, she thinks I'm talking to her because I'm not holding a phone and I've been following her for the last 2 blocks, audibly wheezing. And then I realize something else. Remember how I said that it was my first day back to work? I still wasn't 100%, and I had left my work ID at home. And I work in a very secure government building, the kind of building that doesn't just let you into it. Even if all the security guards know your face, because you've been there for 10 years now. No ID, you still gotta go, get a near cavity search level screen in. And wait for your HR to verify that yes, you still work there, and no, you're not a disgruntled ex-employee looking to steal confidential files. But once you've got your morning colonoscopy, they do give you one of those odd visitor badges, so you can come and go in the building throughout the day without having to have your pride and personal boundaries violated every time. And this little sticky badge that I still had stuck to my chest bears the name of the government agency which I work for. What agency is that? The Department of Mental Health. Because I, despite looking like someone who may have some point in his life had a nickname like Moose, which has on occasion I think led some to initially get the impression that I might be a tad slow on the uptake, am legally the Regional Legal Director and Deputy Chief Counsel for the State Office and Health of Human Services. Her eyes move to the badge. She stays motionless for a moment, then turns and quickly hustles down a side street. It was at that moment I say to my girlfriend, I think some lady just thought I was trying to kidnap her. So here's to you, downtown lady, who I'm pretty sure thought I was some heavy-breathing pervert mental patient instead of a government bureaucrat who was just trying to do something nice for his girlfriend on his lunch break, while vastly overestimating his own physical well-being. Let's not mate again, because I'm afraid your heart won't take it. Also, I'm sorry. To get this started, to some it might not sound scary, but having a stranger press against you and block you from leaving is horrifying, especially when you're young. Normally I try to cover for my mother, but as I've grown older, I kind of blame her a bit, especially after what she said. She just loves to invalidate her oldest daughter. I'd say I was around 8 at the time that this took place. At the time we had to get mail from the post office in town. And so seeing my mom get the mail, my brain decided, wow, I want to be cool like my mom and get the mail. That childish need to prove that I was mature. Eventually, after time and time of begging, my mom let me get the mail. Now to the actual story. I guess it was a weekend as the post office was closed, but you could still grab mail. Just no people that worked there were there. I asked my mom if I could grab the mail as we slowly pulled up outside the post office. She nodded and gave me the keys that had the mail key, and a few others. The keys were loud and jingly. I jumped out the old van and ran up the ramp to the building, avoiding the stairs completely. I opened the door and saw a lady and a man getting their mail, but turning to my side I saw an older man sitting in the corner staring at me. He gave me weird vibes, even as a kid, but still I gave him a real quick smile and a wave. That was a bad move. The man smiled back, revealing his stained teeth. I walked past him and went to the mailbox. Me being me, though, I forgot what key it was, and began fumbling awkwardly as the others grabbing mail left the building. After maybe 3 to 5 minutes of trying and failing, I finally unlocked it. I was so happy that I disregarded the man staring as I grabbed the mail. With a quick click of the lock, I closed the box and began to walk away. I found the gaze of the man as he looked at me, a crooked smile across his face. The look he gave me still gives me chills to this day, almost a decade later. I put my opened hand against the door and began to push when a pair of arms reached around me, one hand forcefully pulling the door shut, and the other around the upper part of my chest, like my collarbone, pulling me into a tight, unwelcomed, and horrible hug. I froze. What was I supposed to do? I was always taught to respect adults, and I did. He had a strong scent of alcohol on him, so much that I think I coughed a few times. He began to speak after a moment of just holding me there. The words he spoke scared me so bad, but now I only remember part of what he said, and I wished I didn't. Hey, where you going? He spoke almost passive-aggressively. Oh, I have to go. My mom is waiting for me. Oh, okay. He sounded defeated and began to let me go. Before I could break away, he held me tighter again, tighter than before. Wait. I have a dog, you know. He had that stupid grin on his face, that scary grin. Oh, that's cool. Yeah. You should come with me and you can play with him. The scary thing is, though, I almost went with him at that moment. The next 8 minutes felt like hours as he let me go and pulled me back hard into him, his scruffy beard and soft dirty coat brushing against me. The details make my head hurt to remember, but he kept telling me no, almost ordering me to go with him. Finally, he seemed to snap. All right, you're coming with me. What? But I need my mom. I have her keys and she's waiting for me, please. That was still my priority, her keys in the mail. Nope, you're coming with me now, he said. He opened the door and began to pull me out. In a moment of his weakness, I broke away, running to my mom in her car. I slammed the door shut, scaring my brother and my mom. I began shaking and crying, dropping the mail on the car floor. I shakily picked it up and handed everything to my mom as she demanded to know what happened. I told her everything, and she looked pissed. I was so glad she was on my side. I looked outside, tears still streaming down my face, and I noticed the man looking at me through the car window from the top ramp of the building. I began to cry harder and panic as he started coming over. My mom stopped me as she noticed him coming. What was her reason for thinking he was completely harmless? He fell at the bottom of the ramp. He tripped. My mom laughed at the creep and started driving away, while she tried to comfort me, saying things like, he was just a harmless old drunk guy. He didn't hurt you. Now, years later, I brought it up to my dad when I was at his house, thinking he knew. My mom never told him, so he was angry, but I calmed him down. He was pissed that my mom didn't come for me sooner, and that she hadn't done more. I told him not to confront my mom on this, and he agreed. Now, not long after telling my dad, I brought it up to my mom. My mom said I was being a drama queen, that I would never get hurt, that he never tried anything. I was furious, but now I don't know if I should be. I mean, I know drunk slurring, but this was almost spiteful, and his tone was demanding. My question that I'll end this story with is, what were his intentions? And do I have the right to be mad? I'm pretty sure I'm being stalked, and I have been for the last 2 years. This story starts around the fall of 2017. I was walking back to work from lunch when I passed this girl and noticed that she got up and started walking behind me. She took a different route and didn't follow me. A few days later it happened again, but this time she was following me. I assumed she wasn't following me at the time because where my office building is situated, you have to go up a set of stairs and pass a few other buildings, and she did not follow me to my building. After a while, I noticed we took the same train home. A lot of the time she would be watching me. When we made eye contact, she would look away. Then she would continue looking when she thought that I wasn't. There's a Whole Foods across from my office. I went there for lunch a couple times during the week. I started seeing the girl sitting in the window for lunch, and she would almost always get up as soon as I left, and walk the same way I did. Around this time, I began seeing her more frequently. During lunchtime or when I go to the metro, she was almost always there. After a couple of months of this, I started noticing that she would get off at the same station as me sometimes. Sometimes she would walk the same way as me. Once I got to my condo, where I live with my brother, she would always pass, but never follow me up to the entrance. During this time, I started receiving phone calls at work from random phone numbers that, at the time, I assumed was spam. There would either be silence on the end, or the person would hang up immediately. I also started receiving fake Facebook requests from people I already knew, or were already on my friends list. December of 2017 comes, and by this time, I'm not going to Whole Foods as often. If she gets off at the same station as me, I go into a restaurant or go shopping for groceries before I go home. Around this time, an old friend that I went to high school with contacts me out of the blue. She started following me on Instagram. We text a couple of times and I accept her follow request. She contacts me again about a month later from a different number, but this time she's texting me frequently. I'm talking about every other day. I'm not one to be mean or show when I'm annoyed too often, but after months of this, when she asks me if she's texting me too frequently, I do not hesitate to tell her that she could lay off a bit. She stops for a week or so, but then starts texting frequently again. This whole ordeal should have sent red flags up for several reasons. During this time, she would ask me so many random questions, like how you would if you were trying to get to know somebody. She would ask for selfies, which I declined because I don't like taking pictures of myself. And I would tell her that there are plenty of pictures of me on Facebook. She would ask what I'm doing on the weekends, and the names of my friends on occasion, which I wouldn't tell her because I thought it was weird that she'd want to know my friends' names. I only sent her a couple of videos of fun things I'd do, but that's it. August 2018 rolls around. I'm still seeing creepy girl everywhere during the week. I get pulled into my boss's office. He says that a few coworkers received fake screenshots from Facebook of me talking badly about them. Now, I never post on Facebook. I would never talk crap about my coworkers on social media. I don't have a grudge with anyone, nor do I know of anyone who has a problem with me. I'm fairly easygoing. I managed to clear things up with everyone involved, and I still have my job. Of course, my friend is still texting me fairly frequently, and I tell her what had happened. A couple of days later when I got home from work, I tell her I don't want to get too much into it, but she keeps pushing me for details. I finally told her I was going to bed, and she got the message. The more I thought about all the times she would text me, the more uneasy I got. Some things that she said just didn't make sense, especially from the way I remembered her. We had kept in touch over the years, but just not as frequently, and we hadn't touched base for a while before I heard from her back in December. A couple of weeks later, I decided to reach out to my friend on Instagram, but the Instagram she last messaged me through wasn't there. However, there still was an Instagram for her that I followed and that followed me back. I reached out to her and asked her what her phone number was. The phone number is completely different, and it turns out that she was never the one texting me, nor did she follow me on Instagram. I tracked the number, and it turns out to be from one of those fake phone number accounts. I requested to be blocked from the service, and I never hear from my friend again. After talking about it with my brother and a couple of friends, I'm almost 100% certain it was the girl that was following me. These things only started after she appeared. The phone calls to my office, the fake Facebook requests. A few days before I was pulled aside by my boss, my friend texted me and told me she had a weird feeling about me and wanted to make sure that I was okay. I just thought she was being weird at the time and didn't think too much of it. This whole ordeal is really scary when I look back on it, because I sent videos of myself and my address at one point. My friend even confirmed a post my brother made with pictures he tagged of me on Facebook. I was texting a stranger for 8 months about my life, and they also apparently have access to my Facebook page. I still see this girl since she obviously works in the same area as me. She doesn't follow me around as much, but when she does see me on the metro, she always watches me or sits somewhere that she will be able to make eye contact with me. I'm always careful now if anyone texts me from an unrecognizable phone number, and I am just paranoid. I know this story might seem a little bit all over the place, especially with the conclusion I came to of the girl posing as my friend. But I had to get this off my chest, because that girl still freaks me out to this day.
There is much which we do not understand in this world. Claims of ghosts, paranormal activity, and things which defy all logic and explanation. What you're about to hear is a recollection of incidents that have happened to me. These events have left me with many unanswered questions and a healthy respect for the paranormal. 1990s Apollo Beach, Florida. I was around 5 years old, but I'll never forget this in vivid detail. My parents were taking me and my 2 half-brothers to Universal Studios. Before we left, my brothers and I were outside in the backyard. I remember it being a sunny morning, warm weather, and I was playing with my dog Bobo. He was a Yorkie. We were running around together, and I remember chasing him back and forth, through the backyard and around the tree. Lots of fun for a 5-year-old, I guess. Then my mum called us in to get ready to leave. We go to the park and come back later at night. I start walking around the house looking for my dog and ask my mum where he is. She and my dad take me to a room and talk to me. My first death talk. My mum tells me that Boba was hit by a car the night before. Some girl knocked on our door crying, saying that she hit him. I tried to argue with my mum, because I was playing out back with him earlier in the morning. But she insisted. Apparently my brothers already knew this happened. I'm the youngest, so I spent the night upset. I'm wondering how it could be possible, when I know I was playing him in the morning. Something I shall never forget. This next incident took place in 1995 in Tampa, Florida. There was a week or two period where I would wake up to the living room TV being turned on at around 5 a.m. every morning. We had a Zenith TV. My bedroom door opened up straight into the hallway, which was directly connected to the living room. It was maybe 5 feet from my door to the open living room space. The TV was against the wall, so if I left my room, the TV would be on my right, a few feet away from my door. I would usually just walk out and turn it off, and then go back to bed. It would always turn off by the button on the TV itself. One time, and the last time it happened, I walked out as I usually did, and the rocking chair across from the TV was rocking back and forth. This was a lazy boy recliner. I remember pausing, resting up against the couch arm directly in front of me, and just watching this thing go back and forth whilst the TV was on. Nothing about this gave me a bad vibe, and I had no fear of the situation. It just didn't feel bad. The chair stopped rocking after probably a minute and a half of me watching it, and I asked it to please stop doing that, and turned off the TV. And it never came on again. It was the same location a year or so later. One night I was lying in bed. My head was against the wall of the window, and I left my bedroom door open all the time. I could see the silhouette of my desk in my room, and earlier in the day, I purchased a model plane. It was a Phantom jet or something, and it was still on top of the desk, so I could see the silhouette of the plane. That is just resting on its plastic wheels. I start to get this weird feeling as I'm laying there, so I open my eyes and see the wings of my jet moving around This model is hard plastic, and those wings would never bend like it was. It almost looked like taking putty and moving it around. They were going up and down. The tail fin was also going back and forth. Again, I am the only one seeing a black silhouette of this. I put the covers over my head and occasionally looked out, and it would still be there. I eventually fell asleep under my covers. The next day, I told my mum about it. She was concerned and believed me, which is rare from all the haunting house episodes I've seen. And after that incident, my room always had this dark feeling to it. I always felt like someone was watching me when I was home. I remembered my dad taking me to the movies to get my mind off it. That Jim Carrey movie, The Truman Show I think, had just come out, and we watched it. Not the greatest. For about a week or so, anywhere I went in the house, I felt as if I were being followed. Any time that I was on the computer, on AOL for example, I looked over my shoulder, because I sensed someone was behind me, and my neck would always have hairs sticking up. I remember being in the kitchen one night to get a drink, and I heard footsteps from behind me. I would turn and look, and nothing would be there. It freaked me out, so I ran out of the kitchen, and the footsteps ran with me. I ran to my mum and told her what was going on, and she was freaked out. So she called her ex-sister-in-law, who is a big-time Catholic, who told her about reading verses from the Bible and burned the plane. We ended up doing just that. Once we burned the plane, and she read some verses, the dark feeling lifted from the house, and I never had that issue again. Now, the following incident happened in summer of 1997, and continued on until the year 2000, in Lawton, Virginia. I started dating this girl that I met on AOL, and I would spend the summers in her place. We had met in Disney World back in January 1998, and her parents were cool with it, since they knew she and I weren't both 30-year-old men. The next few stories are from multiple events happening in between this timeline. So, the first night I ever stayed at their house, I slept in her brother's room. He was in Ohio visiting his dad for a few weeks, so he was gone before I got there, and wouldn't be returning for a few weeks. It was upstairs on the second floor, right across from her room. She kept her door closed. This was a custom-built Ryan home that the mother had built with the recently deceased husband. There are no lights in this room for some reason, besides the TV, and the lamp to his iguana that he told me to take care of until he got back. Unfortunately, it died from not eating. He had a TV with a VHS mounted, and only had Revenge of the Nerds on VHS. So I had to keep playing and rewinding to that to fall asleep to. I'm now in the point of my life where I have to fall asleep to either TV or music. I can't do straight darkness with quiet. So I'm laying there all of a sudden. The cracked bedroom door slowly starts to open. Creaking sound and everything. I just lay in bed staring at the door. I'm thinking it's one of the cats, and that it will walk away any second. But the door stops, and there's nothing on the other side. I get up after thinking about even moving and walking over to the door. I peek out of the hall, and there's nothing there. I just end up closing the door, and there are no locks on the damn doors. I probably watched Revenge of the Nerd 3 times before I fell asleep. The second incident probably happened a few weeks later. Her brother Alan is now back, and their older sister's boyfriend, John, is staying over. John and I are on the floor. I'm 15 years old, Alan is around 16, and John is 17. While laying there, I start hearing this heartbeat sound. I wonder if it's just me, but then Alan sits up in bed and asks if we can hear anything. John sits up and says it sounds like a heartbeat. So now I sit up, and we all sit there quietly listening to this heartbeat. It sounds like if you were to put your ear to someone's chest, but without the muffledness. So we all get up and open the bedroom door, and the sound gets louder. We all look at each other like, what the hell? And just close the door. It stopped after a minute or so, and we spent an hour talking about it and sharing stories. This third incident happened one night that I was sitting in the living room area downstairs in the first floor with my ex. It's probably close to midnight, and we just finished watching a VHS movie. When the VCR cuts to static, when the film ends when it auto rewinds. So, she and I are just sitting there talking to each other, and she's looking at the TV, and she just breaks out into a scream and stands up on the couch and takes off. I follow her and have no idea what the hell is going on, and she tells me that she saw a face in the TV static. I never saw it, but it scared the shit out of me. The fourth incident happened one night when we were on the couch in the living room again, and she was sleeping. I was watching TV, and she woke up screaming, claiming she was dreaming of a blue light coming from the sunroom, which was located directly behind the TV room. This room is accessed on doors located to the left and right of the TV stand. She says the blue light turned into something that attacked the both of us on the couch. She said she woke up right before it got to us, and her screaming scares the shit out of 15-year-old me. The fifth incident happened shortly after. We were back in the living room of nightmares, and we had just finished watching a movie and turned off the TV and were talking. A few minutes into the conversation, the radio had turned on and started playing static with some distorted male voice. Nothing could be made out, but you could tell it was male. I remember jumping over the couch, leaving her ass behind when it happened, and she followed, after screaming, of course. But I can vouch for this, because the radio was unplugged. We had to plug in the VCR, therefore there was no cable to connect the radio. And I can tell you with 100% certainty that this radio was not plugged into the wall, and there were no batteries in it at the time. She tells me that the voice that she heard sounded like her late stepfather. I don't know who he was, as I never met him. This sixth incident happened one evening at around 5 or 6 p.m. She and I were in the computer room. This room had a 2-door entry point that led into the foyer, where the front door was. Across from this was an open room living area. We were playing Sims or Roller Coaster Tycoons. It was all new at the time, and all of a sudden, we both hear a female voice coming from across the foyer from the living room. We both look over at the couch, because it sounded like the voice was coming from that room, and we saw nothing, but the voice continued. We both ran out the front door and waited outside for her mum to arrive home from work, and we told her what happened, but she just laughed about it. So, life moves on. For the next few years, I continued experiencing strange and paranormal experiences. One that stands out, though, happened about 4 or 5 years later, after my life had taken a somewhat different turn. I was chief dispatcher, stationed on Camp Schwab, Okinawa, Japan, back in 2005. I had to stay overnight at a lot on our motor pool for midnight vehicle runs. Our motor pool was located in the corner of the base on top of a hill surrounded by trees. This area has since been expanded and the trees are gone. Ruins the feeling of isolation. But anywho, the last vehicle left around midnight, and it was now around 1:30 or 2, and I was getting ready for bed. Those vehicles would have to be back by 6, and I just slipped him one of my Everybody Loves Raymond DVDs and set up a cot to sleep in the office of my boss. The motor pool is surrounded by a 10-foot barbed wire fence and locked with a chain and padlock, which I secured when the last vehicle left. This gate is located across from the main room office. I was about 150 yards away. The office I'm in is surrounded by windows, and mind you, I have been up here all day since 7:30. Standing in the main office, about to pick an episode, I heard a loud banging from the steel door that is located out in the hallway, which was on the other side of the wooden door in the office, and I was in. The steel door was out, and to the left, about 20 feet from this wooden door, and led outside. It also made a very distinctive sound when it opened and closed, because the metal would always catch the top of the frame. Very annoying. It sounded as if the door were being kicked in. So I'm standing there, with the Raymond DVD looping on the main title screen, thinking to myself, what the hell? I'm about 20 at the time, and alone, and very scared, knowing that I'm the only one in this secluded area. After around 6 to 7 bangs, it stops. I'm just standing there looking at the wooden door to see what's next. This steel door never opened, but I hear footsteps from out in the hall. Now I'm really freaking out, but still standing there waiting for this cheap-ass wooden door to explode in my face with a demon behind it. So now I'm focusing on the bottom of the wooden door, where there is about an inch of space from the door to the concrete, and I see a shadow pass by, from right to left, in sync with footsteps. The shadow was heading into the maintenance bay area, and as the shadow passes by, the footsteps stop. I slowly walk over to the wooden door and lock it. Now, I'm trying to think rationally on what the hell happened. I can't figure it out. Other guys say the base was haunted, as it was a World War II site after all. After around 10 minutes of realizing that I wasn't able to sleep, and my Raymond DVD still looping on the menu screen, I decided to go and check it out. As you would. Sadly, I had nothing to defend myself with, so I just slowly walked out into the hallway, checking the steel door, closed and locked, as it would be, then out into the maintenance bay. I turned on the lights and saw nothing, just Humvees and a 7-ton truck that were being worked on earlier. I checked the back rooms, nothing. So I went back to the main office, locked that shitty wooden door, and played Everybody Loves Raymond. About an hour prior to this, my friend wanted to come up and grab some files he needed for tomorrow, but I told him I would be getting ready for bed. After this happened, I realized I couldn't sleep, so I called him back and asked him if he still wanted to get his stuff. Sadly, I had to unlock the main gate, so I ran across the motor pool as fast as I could and unlocked that shit. Keeping in mind the trees on either side of the main gate are in complete darkness, and it didn't help. Once I saw his headlights coming up the hill, I felt a little better, and while he was there, I tried to sleep, and sure enough I did. I woke up later, around 6 AM to the sound of a 7-ton horn at the gate. Only time this happened whilst I worked late, and the next time I had to stay over, I was pretty jumpy, but thankfully nothing happened. While still in Japan, we went to Iwo Jima for the 60th anniversary. We drove veterans around to the sites in Humvees all day. Near the end, close to sunset, I was with one of the SSGTS. We were tasked with going to all the sites to make sure that no one was left behind, as the plane was departing soon. We pulled up to one location, Hospital Cave. It's where the Japanese took their wounded. Lots of cave structures in the island, mind you. Very interesting place. So we pull up, and the sergeant says, just go inside to make sure no one is wandering around in there. So, I get out, and as I'm walking up to the entrance, I notice the generator is off. I'll be damned if I'm walking in a dark-ass cave. So I make the command decision that I would walk only to where the light starts fading into darkness. So about 40 feet in, I simply spoke out loud, "Anyone in here?" And as quickly as someone would respond, I heard multiple Japanese voices from deeper in the cave. Not faint, distinctively male, and I knew Japanese and would be able to understand. This didn't freak me out much, since I can accept that a lot of people died here, but I just backed up and walked out and told my sergeant that no one was there. I didn't tell him about it though. This next story took place in Cherry Point, North Carolina, a few years later in 2007. When I first got my barracks room, I didn't have a roommate. The rooms were very bare and only had 2 sets of beds and a nightstand in between. I did not have any table lights. For about a week straight, I had the same recurring nightmare of these dog demons attacking me, taking me down and ripping my throat open. I would always wake up sweating and freaked out, and of course in the dark, because the only light immediately available was my cell phone, which was just a Motorola Razr. The dream felt very real, and waking up in the dark never made it better. I ended up going to Walmart to buy a shitty lamp. A few months later, I was sent to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. I spent a few months there, and we came back to Cherry Point. Lucky me, the belittling sergeant made me go right back to the same room I was in before. But this time, I had a roommate, Joe. One night, I woke up to 3 loud bangs on the nightstand next to me. The best way to describe it, and only military folks might get it, but the lights, lights, lights command you get in boot camp. They would tell you that the lights would come on. Basically, it's time to get the hell up. Well, I woke up on the 2nd slam and sat up on the 3rd slam. On the desk, the lights from the street outside were shining through the curtain. So there was some light in the room. I looked over at Joe, and he is sound asleep. What the hell? I ended up just going back to sleep and brushing it off as just another really crazy night. I never told my roommate about it, because he didn't seem like the kind of guy who would believe it. Fast forward to 2008, in Laurel, Maryland. I am now out of the military, and living with my new, now ex-girlfriend's parents. I am sleeping in her older sister's room, who has since moved out. I stayed up late to play video games, and was trying to sleep. It was around 3 a.m. While laying there, a music box starts playing on the dressing corner. I open my eyes, stare into the ceiling, and just take in that this is happening. I sit up and look, and I see the music box, but it's closed. It's the one that plays when you open the top box. It played for a few seconds, then stops. I get up and walk over to it. I open it up, and it starts playing again, then fades off, because you have to wind it up for more freaky fun. I have slept in this room for months, and this has never happened. I laugh it off as one of the less freaky things that have happened, and go to get a glass of water and then return to bed. A few days later, I'm downstairs in the basement watching TV. And right above was the room I'm sleeping in, which was the older sister's room. Whilst I'm sitting there, I start to hear footsteps above me, in the room walking around. I pause and just listen. It's clearly footsteps. Hard to mistake that. The hardwood floors above me were creaking. And I will also note that I am the only one home during this day. I don't know the history of the house either, and it stops after a minute or so, and I continue to watch TV. A few weeks had passed, and at this point ghost hunters had quelled my interest. So I was watching that. So one night I decided to use my MacBook to record audio as I slept. I did this for about a week, and only once did I ever catch anything. It sounded like a faint male voice, but I couldn't make out anything it was saying. That house certainly had me on my toes, as there were plenty of paranormal experiences not worth mentioning that I had. But something happened a few years later. I responded to a 911 hang-up at one of our ranges at around 9 p.m. This was in 2012. They're out in the middle of the woods near an old wildlife refuge, so they're pretty isolated. There are no streetlights out there, and it's a few buildings with a lot of open fields for sniper ranges and a ton of woods. I pulled up to the gate, unlocked it and drove in. I parked and walked up to the classrooms where the 911 hang-up phone was located. I should also note that the entire area has significance to the Civil War era and World War II, and it is a military installation. I would also like to note that the number for the 911 hang-up does not exist, but it occasionally trips our dispatch call center for unknown reasons. I've had my share of paranormal experiences, as by this point you should know. So I take the patrol shotgun out, so that I feel better about taking this stupid call in the dark of night, while responding to a 911 hang-up line that no longer exists. I unlock the door to the small wooden trailer building, and as I open the door, the only light illuminating my path is a red exit sign directly above my head. I don't see any light switches, so immediately I take a few steps in to locate them. As I do, there is a doorway directly to my right, and by this time I can see in my peripheral vision a human-shaped shadow with the red exit sign light illuminating it. I quickly turn with the shotgun as my heart starts racing. I can make out a face. I quickly start hitting the wall and manage to find a light switch, which reveals a training dummy sitting in a chair. I take a breath and step back outside onto the deck and radio in for assistance, as I'm now going to say, screw this ghost hunt by myself. I go back inside and do a quick sweep of the building, as it only has 5 small training rooms. I also check the room where the phone line doesn't exist. No phone. Shocker. I then walk back outside and wait for my backup officer, who comes within 8 minutes of my call. Once he gets there, he already knows how dumb this is, because this call is creepy whenever we get it. We then proceed to check out the outside of the remaining 3 buildings in the area. Nothing. So we start heading back to our vehicles. As we approach our cars, an alarm starts going off on a small metal box attached to a metal unit sticking out of the ground. It flashes a red light affixed to the top of the box, and we look at each other like, really? And start walking towards it. It's located between the training trailer and the range/bay office. I radio in the alarm and ask if they can contact facilities, since neither of us knew this was even a thing out here, and we had no idea how to shut it off. I then notice there's a small keyhole in the metal box that is attached under the light. I grab my keyring and try and see if anything would fit. And as soon as I make contact with the key to the metal, the alarm stopped flashing. I looked at my friend and said, "We need to leave. This is getting stupid." He agreed. I radioed them and told them that the alarm had stopped and that we were getting back in service. We would have to drive out to the same location again, located on the wildlife refuge area, where we had ammo supplies and point bunkers. These are alarmed by our alarm center, by contact alarms, but still require visual checks. We would have to check these 3 times during shift. I work mids, so the last check would be after sunset. To get out to this location, you had to drive past the range classroom I previously mentioned. And this road turns into dirt and rock and surrounded by trees. There's a big chain link fence that separates the ranges and the wildlife refuge. So I get out, use our dumb metal key that makes the fence open automatically, and usually takes a while to get to work. So that's fun, especially when it's tick season. It's a winding road, but mostly flat, and there are trees on both sides of the road. And again, there is no light out here, so it's only your headlights, and it takes around 10 minutes to get to the bunker fence. Prior to making the turn on the road that leads to the bunkers, there's a marker on the left side of the road that just says Site D. I'm familiar with this location because I and a few others worked and used to visit it time and time again because we're nerds when it comes to ghost stuff. But it's an old parish cemetery and has a place marker. Apparently it's from the early 1800s, before the parish was relocated, and it has a little over 20 headstones in there, some faded and some in pretty good shape for being quite old. It's kind of creepy. So I complete the bunker check and head back. As I turn from the bunker road towards the road that leads to Site D, the grave site is now on my right. I'm heading back to the range area, so I'm looking at another 10-minute drive back into this dark wooded area. I'm probably 100 yards from Site D, when this orb of light appears. I sized it to be about the same size as your average beach ball, and at this point I stop the vehicle and watch it. It's hovering close to the ground in the grassy area, just off the road next to the Site D sign. There's no illumination around it, just a ball of light, and it lasts for around 5 to 10 seconds, and just vanishes. When it comes to the paranormal, the only thing I've seen were moving objects, shadows and heard voices. I've never seen lights or apparitions, so I take a moment to try and understand what I saw. I figure maybe, just maybe, it was from my headlights. So I back up to the Nunca Road, about 50 yards back, and drive forward to try and recreate what just happened. I stopped near where I was before, and just sat there, and thought to myself, maybe it was some paranormal shit that just happened, and no one would believe me if I said a thing. So I put it back in drive, and headed back, and as I drove past Site D, where I saw the light, I could only see some sticks and grass in the area, nothing else. I looked up towards the dark road that leads up to the graveyard, expecting to see a demon ready to charge me, but it was just pitch black. So now my imagination starts running wild, and I feel like I just need to go. So I cut a few minutes off my 10-minute drive, while hoping I don't slam into deer or other forest creature, while constantly looking in my rear view mirror, which is pointless, because the only thing I can see is dust from the road from the tail lights, so it makes it worse. I get to the gate that separates the refuge from the range control, and I'm a little hesitant to get out of the car, still thinking about that demon. Let me try and point out that this time in my life, I had been watching a lot of My Haunted House / My Ghost Story, so I'm in a bad place mentally, I guess. So I let the dust settle after hopping out of the car and finally leave. I can't see shit, because I pulled up too close to the gate, and the damn metal key isn't working. I look back down the road, and I can't see anything. Finally, the key works and the gate makes a loud beep, which made me jump. I drove through and was free. It was a strange occurrence, and it would have been better if I hadn't been thinking about demons the entire time. Not long after, I was tasked with training a new officer, and we were doing a site check of the range control, the same place where I had the 911 hang-up. This was still 2012, and both the orb of light and the 911 hang-up had already occurred. It was around 8:30, and we'd just finished walking around checking the doors and making sure that they were locked. I would also like to note that we have to keep the gate secured, even when we come and go onto the ranges. So we locked the gate, and we came in. She decides she needs to use the bathroom, which is located up on the platform where the classrooms were. So I watch her walk up and into the bathrooms. I will also note that there are male and female bathrooms, and I'm sitting in the passenger seat looking around. We're parked in the center of a parking lot, about 300 feet long, with 3 rows of cars. Not too big, but it's an open area. The vehicle is facing the classrooms and the bathrooms, so she could see where she was walking. However, there are lights that were on the other side of the bathrooms themselves, as someone from earlier left it on before they secured the ranges at 4 p.m. So I can also see onto the deck. As I'm sitting there waiting, I hear from the window behind me on the rear passenger window, tap tap tap, clear as day. It's no different than if you took your fingernail and tapped it on a pane of glass. I just stared straight ahead and pressed the car lock, but never turned around. I grabbed my phone and quickly texted my friend Bree, who was one of the friends who would go to the gravesite with me, and I told her what just happened. She laughed and told me to get out of there. And after a minute or two later, my officer in training exits the bathroom and starts speed walking to the car whilst I'm looking around. I unlock the door, and once she hits the pavement from the wooden ramp that leads into the parking lot, she gets in. Before I can even tell her what happened, she asks, "Did you go into the bathroom too?" And I told her no. She continues to ask me if I was walking around, and I told her that I was in the car the whole time. She told me to stop messing with her, as she knew I was there. I told her that I was in the car, and then she tells me that while she was there, she heard footsteps outside onto the wooden deck, and now she's freaked out. So I say, "Really? Well, let me tell you what I just dealt with," and explained about the freaky window tapping. We both agreed to get out of there as quickly as possible, so as we were driving off, we were talking about both incidences, and I start telling her about the 911 hang-up and the ball of light as we were leaving. We talk about this until our next stop, at a small airport that we have equipment at. The drive is probably close to 10 minutes away. The airfield is actually across from the woods that Site D Cemetery is located in by a good distance. So we pull over after our check, and we're talking about what happens. She takes her phone out, and she shows me an article on a ghost story that she was reading earlier in the week. Once we're finished, we were going to drive off. but noticed that the headlights were off. She swears she never turned them off, but I can't confirm this. 3 years later, our in-service sucks, but we have to meet at the ranges at 7 a.m. on one of the days. I live an hour away from work, and I don't feel like waking up any earlier than I have to, because the day before, we didn't get off until 10 p.m, so I decide to just sleep at work and make it interesting. I decide to sleep at the ranges, because I just want to say that I did it. So, as everyone is leaving, I'm sitting in my car, a 4-door sedan, and I have the back seat down that opens towards the trunk space. I have the car running, and the only light I have is from my headlights. So I start texting my friend Bree again, and telling her that this was probably a dumb idea, but maybe I'll get to see Claude, as Claude is the name of one of the cemetery gravestones. The first one when you walked into the gated cemetery at Site D. We would always joke around that Claude would come and haunt us for walking around the cemetery because we were dumb. I call dispatch and tell them that I'll be out there all night and that I'm sleeping in my car. So they would let the midnight crew know that when they did their site checks. At this point in time, we no longer checked the bunkers, but they would have to do checks on range control 3 times a night. I left my police radio on to listen to the chatter since I couldn't keep my car on all night. It was just a little too freaky for me to just listen to the crickets and look into the dark void. So I'm laying there and hearing the midnight officer call out for his checks. So I keep popping up to see if he comes in. It's around 11:30 p.m. now, and I waited until midnight, when I realized this guy is just calling shit out and wasn't even doing his checks. Lazy night shift. Before I get into this part, I want to let you know that although me wanting to sleep in my car at a place where I have experienced a few, what I consider, paranormal things, I did take the initiative to park my car as close to the range bay wall as possible. I had a forklift with a box covering my passenger side of the car and parked close enough to the range of the bay wall that you couldn't walk between it. Only my driver's side and front of my car is exposed. So I'm laying there in my car, in my sleeping bag, with my head near the driver's seat. It's a little after midnight, and I was browsing on my phone, and my mind was occupied. All of a sudden, I hear a loud bang on the side of the car. It was enough force to where I felt the car frame move. I pop up, thinking it was the midnight guy. I use my flashlight, but nothing is around me. But I'm in it to win it, baby. I pressed the car door locks just to make sure it was locked, and I took one look around with the flashlight, and still nothing. Just open parking lot and darkness. So now I reposition myself in the car. I am now uncomfortably sleeping head first in the truck, with my feet towards the driver's door, because I'll be damned if whatever just did that will catch me sleeping all night. Nothing else happened that night, but it did take me a while to fall asleep. I woke up at 7 a.m, making me a few minutes late for training, even though I slept right next to the building. It sucks. There was also no damage from my car from the bang. This is the final tale of what's happened to me. My friend Troy was working at one of our off-sites. It's nowhere near where any of the other incidences took place. It's in a different zip code. It was after working hours, probably 9 p.m, and he was sitting in the police room that is located in the lobby of the building. We have turnstiles, similar to an amusement park, where you would badge in and then walk through. They turned vertically, and Base Pro uses the same ones. So there's no one in the building after 6 PM. He's watching TV waiting for his relief at 9:30 when he hears bleep, the sound the turnstile makes when you swipe your badge to leave. He jumps up and looks out into the lobby. The door is right next to the area. You could just lean over and look, and sees the turnstile cycle through, watching the metal bars physically turn clockwise as if someone was walking through, but insists that no one was there. He grabs the key ring and speed walks out of the lobby, locks the door, and waits at the main gate into the car for his relief. He refuses to work that building anymore. I spoke to a few midnight people, and they said they heard footsteps, female laughter, and voices sometimes at night. Apparently years ago, a contractor woman who did access control had a heart attack and died, either at the facility or later at hospital. So they presume it's her. I've been working for this place for 9 years, and that has never happened whilst I've been there.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to my channel so you don't miss the next one. Also, if you enjoy my narration style, please be sure to visit my cousin's channel, We Shouldn't Be Here, as his narration style is similar to mine. Until next time.